Back in the ancient times of feudal Japan, in the year of our Lord 1989, a video game developer and publisher known as Capcom, renowned for such classics as microtransactions in your single-player games, would develop and publish a horror movie tie-in game known as Sweet Home. But due to it being 1989 and the entirety of the world still seeing things through a two-dimensional view in 8-bit colours, the horror aspect of this horror game was somewhat lacking. That was until the release of the Sony PlayStation, when suddenly humans developed the ability to see the world in 3D. Wanting to take a crack at creating the game closer in line with their original vision, they decided to not do that and instead do something entirely different, as the project would slowly morph into what we now know as Resident Evil. A survival horror, slow-paced, yet thought-provoking story involving puzzles, exploration, zombies, monsters, and an evil company named Umbrella. A game that, while not the first in the genre, would go on to define the term survival horror due to the player desperately attempting to survive after hearing the horror of this game's voice acting.
What is this?
Wow, what a mansion!
Survival horror being the key aspect that helped define the overall feel and atmosphere of these early games, something that Capcom would hold on to dearly over the years as they decided to completely scrap that concept entirely because screw its consumers. Going on to become a well-defined franchise with its own strong roots, raking in millions of dollars with every release, of course people would want to turn those millions of dollars into even more millions of dollars. And in 1997, the production company Constantine Films would buy the rights to adapt the story into live action, with the job of writing and directing eventually landing in the hands of Paul W.S. Anderson, known for his work on both the Mortal Kombat movie adaptation and the science fiction horror movie Event Horizon. So clearly this man could be trusted with the extremely beloved source material that's absolutely dripping with ooze and atmosphere that he definitely would keep intact. Coming out between the releases of Code Veronica and Resident Evil 0, Paul W.S. Anderson decided to share his superior intellect with us, as he's actually a secret genius who could sense the incoming tonal shift of the games, and thought that he'd get a head start on things by just kind of forgetting that this Resident Evil movie is a Resident Evil movie, and instead creating an action flick for his naked wife to be in a bunch. Something which I am firmly against, due to my deeply ingrained fear of women, both naked and clothed. Speaking of which, make sure to follow me on all my socials to definitely not see that. Unless... Resident Evil is kind of an insane thing to try and translate into the world of cinema. Something that I would know a lot about, due to being the expert in video games that I am, as my virginity is unrivaled and untouched. How do you take something that from its very core of what defines it is inherently slow-paced and methodically constructed to create an almost suffocating feeling of dread as you slowly unravel this puzzle box of a game? Well, it's actually quite simple. You don't do any of that because you have free will and no one is going to stop you. And stop him they did not. The first movie in the series immediately begins by telling fans of the games that these are the events that led up to what unfolded in Raccoon City. Raccoon City being a city that is inhabited by nothing but raccoons. And also people. People who were unfortunately born without the ability to strafe sideways and would soon be turned into zombies because of it. We see someone who's gotten a hold of the Jeff Bezos robot wanking arms and has used them to retrieve what is known as the T-virus, which is short for the Trichomonas vaginalis virus, a virus that they then decide to throw on the ground and deliberately unleash because it's inhumane to keep them all cooped up in those tiny little vials. The advanced AI security system is able to detect the outbreak of the Ebola virus before deciding to give all of us an insight into the average American corporation mindset, as everybody is then brutally killed for the sake of profit and public perception. Rivaling the level of security at Epstein Island after a young vulnerable child arrives, everything goes into lockdown and nobody is allowed to leave. A nerve agent is then released into the air and everyone inside the facility is gassed to death except the people currently in the elevators, due to it being common knowledge that elevators are magical and gases simply cannot enter them. Attempting to recreate what it was like to be born, a woman forces her head out of the elevator to try and free herself, which has the unfortunate side effect of reminding me of my own birth, as someone is then decapitated. And speaking of exposed inside parts, we then see a woman named Alice waking up in the shower with none of her memories. Not only is she missing her memories, but she's also missing her clothes as this dirty harlot showers naked. Despicable. After I'm done praying for her soul, she then finds her iconic red dress for no other reason than it looks kinda cool. Apparently she's had a night out with Jimmy Savile, as she's woken up in a large house with no idea how she got there. We see that she's being surveilled by the same security system that unleashed the gas on those office workers for not meeting their deadlines fast enough, which can mean only one thing. A dirty pervert was watching her in the shower. While having a look around the mansion, that definitely isn't a reference to Resident Evil 1's iconic Spencer mansion, I promise, she discovers that she's broken the ancient code of hoes before bros, as she finds a wedding photograph with her and a man. After realizing that she really shouldn't have smoked that shit because she can't even remember her own wedding, she's then grabbed by a different man, as an armed group then breaks into the mansion and captures them both. An armed group who then proceeds to ask Alice for a report as if she's one of them, meaning that they had absolutely no reason to break through those windows and jump scare them when they could have literally just used the front door to greet someone that they know. Alice doesn't remember, but she's being told that she's a soldier and a member of this group, and when the security system was activated, it released something into the air, causing her to lose consciousness, her memories, and also her clothes. The man who grabbed her for some reason is a newly transferred cop with no idea what's going on, named Matthew. This is the movie's substitute for the classic video game character Leon S. Kennedy, who was also a police officer with absolutely no idea what's going on, except it isn't and has absolutely nothing to do with that. In typical Resident Evil fashion, this large mansion, that's unfortunately not explored any further in not so typical Resident Evil fashion, is actually housed above a secret umbrella facility where they mass produce umbrellas, but in secret. Umbrella being a company that controls the entire market for almost everything, ranging from technology to pharmaceuticals to military-grade weaponry. Below the mansion is one of their research facilities named the Hive. After getting on the Umbrella Express, they discover an unconscious man, the other person from the wedding photograph, who also has no memory just like Alice. The leader of this militaristic window-smashing group is named One. Yes, his name is One, who explains that they all work for Umbrella, and that the mansion is an emergency entrance to the Hive, where Alice and husband boy were placed to keep it secure. They refer to the AI security system as the Red Queen, a homicidal artificial intelligence which takes on the form of a child. Which of course is an absolutely terrible idea, due to homicidal artificial AIs that don't want to kill all of humanity being about as rare as a furry without parental issues. One explains that 5 hours ago, the Red Queen sealed the Hive off and killed everyone in it, without the team knowing about the outbreak of the virus that it's currently containing. You see, the Red Queen actually did its job and contained the outbreak, but failed to neglect to actually report it. You know, like the most important part. And because of the team not knowing about the outbreak and the potential for them to accidentally allow it to escape, looking at the Hive doors in the same way that a cave diver sees a suicidally small gap, they need to put their bodies inside. After exploring the completely empty office rooms and walking past the flooded laboratories with socially awkward zombies that only open their eyes after everyone has left, they discover a hallway lined with mirrors, because apparently the Red Queen is a narcissist who needs to see herself from every possible angle. One and a group of fodder characters are then locked in the hallway, and the people outside are forced to watch as lasers then begin moving across the room, taking off fingers, heads, and slicing torsos in half, until there's just one left, who's coincidentally named One, being good enough at doing quick-time events that he's able to dodge all of the lasers, until they then form a grid pattern that he can't possibly escape. That is, unless he took one step backwards. One not being able to take a step backwards is a reference to the fact that he actually has tank controls, like in the original PlayStation games. The laser room actually being something that Capcom would take direct influence from and incorporate into a later game, Resident Evil 4, so you can live out your fantasy of getting sliced into tiny little pieces. You weirdo. Now that the hallway has been freshly coated in the blood of their closest friends, Alice and one of the soldiers, Kaplan, are able to go through the hallway to reach the Red Queen's computer, where Kaplan then uses his Pip-Boy to boot into her, before deleting her System 32 and rebooting. As like most things in life, it's fixed with a simple off and on again. Before they commit child abuse and cease this being from existence, the Red Queen appears in its terrifying form of a little girl and tells them not to shut her down, otherwise the facility will lose its power. But once again, due to her inability to share any actual helpful information, they shut her down and the system reboots after it's done its forced Windows update. What would be a blessing in the original Resident Evil games now being a curse in the movie, all of the locked doors are now unlocked, meaning that whatever was trapped behind them can now get out. A minor inconvenience, like driving into a speed bump, otherwise known as a toddler, on your nightly drunk drive, but an inconvenience they must endure to complete their mission. A mission that I don't really understand the full purpose of now that I think about it. Matthew and two other members of the Umbrella team, JD and Rain, played by Michelle Rodriguez as she plays Michelle Rodriguez, had stayed back from the rest of the group as they went to investigate. But while they're isolated from the rest of the group under confusing circumstances, they're then attacked by something horrific. A disabled person. Due to being ableist, Rain is then bitten by one of them, so decides to relieve the government of paying their disability benefits. Zombies then begin appearing with large sections of their faces removed, and Rain begins opening fire on the medically unfortunate. JD is then ripped to shreds as Alice has a flashback about offering to give someone the virus. You see, despite actually working for Umbrella, Alice is actually a good person that was going to take their virus that's capable of wiping out the entirety of humanity and give it to some random person. But there's no time to think about philanthropic work, as during the chaos, something has broken out of its containment. Shit CGI. I mean a licker. A blind enemy from the games that uses the sound of the player to track them down, before giving them a non-consensual licking session. After running away from the rest of the group because screw those guys, Alice encounters a zombie dog, which is much like a normal dog, except French. After finally earning enough XP to unlock the martial arts perk, she then suddenly remembers that she knows how to do things after accidentally locking herself in a room with a zombie. Something which would lead to a pretty unfortunate time in the early games, but luckily for Alice, she has feet. Alice then decides to euthanize the group of dogs before giving one a flying kick to the face to spite Peter in a scene that makes me feel a little sad. Not because of the animal abuse, but because these zombie dogs were created practically due to them breeding real-life dogs and infecting them with the T-virus and not using CGI, which in turn shines a brighter light on how genuinely bad the CGI is in parts of this movie, even for 2002 standards. There's been enough child neglect and animal abuse for now, so it's time for the movie to drop a little bit of plot. Matthew recognizes one of the zombies, a woman named Lisa, who we saw Alice speaking to earlier in her flashback sequence about giving her the virus. Seeing another female, Alice quite understandably kills her on the spot, as we then learn that she's Matthew's sister. Wow, what a deep and impactful plot point between two characters that I very much care about. Matthew then admits to being a fake cop to get discounts at various stores or something, and he's actually here to find information to use against Umbrella. He sent his sister Lisa in to infiltrate the hive, and that's why he was snooping around the mansion after communication between the pair ceased, around the same time her life ceased. Nice one, Matt. Just to once again prove that Paul W.S. Anderson has actually played the Resident Evil games, I promise, the surviving members of the Umbrella team then tell Alice, Matthew and husbandman that the doors to the hive are then going to seal shut in less than an hour, but they're currently trapped due to the infected being on all sides of them. Countdowns before imminent death being somewhat of a staple ending the earlier games, but with the only key difference being this time around is that the Umbrella team knew that they had limited time for the whole mission, but just couldn't be bothered to tell anyone until now. Being out of ink ribbons and down to the last green herb, with no other option, Alice decides to turn the Red Queen back on in hopes of her being able to help them. She tells them that they can only kill the infected with a bullet to the head, and that anyone who has been bitten or scratched will become infected, unlike the games, where a sloppy zombie hickey is somewhat of a regular occurrence. Threatening to destroy this small child if she refuses to cooperate, the Red Queen tells them about the utility tunnels that they can use to escape, followed by Kaplan immediately explaining that he knows about these security tunnels, negating the whole reason to turn the Red Queen back on in the first place. As punishment for suffering with selective Alzheimer's, the group is then swarmed by the infected, and Kaplan is bitten. He gets separated from the rest of the group due to the pipes that they're currently using to avoid the zombie snapping, as the Hollywood diet consisting of the flesh of the young has made them a little heavy lately. Luckily for the rest of the group, they're able to make their way out of the tunnels, where Alice then has another flashback and watches as a cute little bunny rabbit is repeatedly penetrated. Thanks to her magical powers that allow her to suddenly learn important plot points, she remembers that the blue Gatorade is the virus and that the green Mountain Dew is the antivirus. This flashback is apparently powerful enough to trigger another flashback, except it's not clear who's actually experiencing it this time around, as we then see the husband, who's actually named Spence, because you know, Spencer Mansion I guess, was actually spying on Alice and Lisa when they were talking about stealing the virus. Alice wanted to steal the virus to expose Umbrella, but Spence wanted to steal the virus to sell it. A flashback which they both seem to be experiencing at the same time, as Alice now somehow knows that Spence was spying on her and stole the virus and caused the outbreak, despite her never actually seeing him in any of those original scenarios. And he would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for those meddling kids and their stupid dog, and also the fact that the Red Queen had security measures in place outside of the hive too. Spence was gassed unconscious in the train cart where he was found, where the virus and the antivirus is still located, due to each and every member of the team not noticing it earlier, because they're all blind and also stupid. Spence is then bitten by a zombie emerging from a pool of water behind him, as apparently he suffers from situational deafness, before locking the survivors in a room and heading back to the train to get the antivirus for himself. Something which doesn't exactly go to plan, as the licker then appears and aggressively licks him to death, like a dog, after a really bad case of the zoomies. With Spence now preoccupied and unable to open the door to let them out, they're trapped inside and will be sealed inside forever. That is, until Kaplan, somehow still alive, shuts off the Red Queen once again and opens the door to save them. They get back to the train and use the antivirus on Rain and Kaplan, similar to the events of Resident Evil 2, as Claire and Leon use the train to escape while wasting a perfectly good dose of the antivirus on Sherry. But after feasting on Spence's flesh, the licker has mutated and has returned for some more man-meat. Starting with Kaplan as he's yeeted out from the speeding train, as we see that the new and improved licker is actually using a mix of CGI and both practical effects, with the CG being somewhat questionable, in that I mean f***ing terrible. During the commotion, Rain had fully turned into a zombie due to the infection being too far along for the antivirus to work, and as she's killed, the licker will never live to lick another day, as its tongue is sliced off and is dropped out the bottom of the train. Alice and Matthew being the only survivors, but not uninjured, as a swipe from the licker's claw caught Matthew, eventually make it out of the hive and back to the mansion above ground, where the infection begins rapidly taking over Matthew and his little baby boy immune system. Because of this, suddenly a group of people in protective clothing appear because Alice is stinky and they don't want to get any of her stinky germs on them. After telling her that she should really go take a bath, they then steal her new best friend and say that they're going to use him for the Nemesis program. What could they mean by that? Why do they need to be so subtle about it? Due to her overwhelming stench, Alice is then taken by the hazmat-wearing group and transferred to a Raccoon City facility, where she's going to be forced into the long and arduous process of being turned into a raccoon. This, unfortunately, is never able to come to fruition, as while she's unconscious, we can hear some people at Umbrella HQ talking about reopening the hive to go and take a look inside. Something which unsurprisingly immediately backfires, as surprise surprise the infection escapes, and now everybody is given AIDS 2.0. With Super AIDS now ravaging the world, and like how racism is ravaging Twitter, Alice wakes up in the raccoon facility with no one in sight, as they've all been consumed by the zombie raccoons. Now that we've established that Paul W.S. Anderson decided to keep his interpretation of Resident Evil as close to the games as possible, let's talk about how Paul W.S. Anderson didn't keep his interpretation as close to the games as possible. Let's be real, action and naked women sell movies because we're all Second Amendment loving gooners. The Resident Evil title is just something to attach to it, due to it already having a pre-established fanbase that can be tapped into, just like the Vietnamese tapping into the potential of forced child labour. It obviously doesn't follow the events of the games, but it does take elements from them, like certain plot points, names, characters, creatures and locations, and throws them all together to create a kind of Resident Evil stew. A stew that you're going to eat and going to enjoy, because they're going to serve you 6 more servings of it. Taking various inspiration from the games to create its own thing, the movies are best thought of as a Resident Evil alternate reality. A slightly mediocre reality at that, but mediocrity is fine, otherwise you wouldn't be watching my videos. When it comes to the reception of the movie from fans of the original games, it's more than safe to say that the general consensus surrounding the movie was disappointment. While on its own, it's a perfect time capsule of what you'd expect from an early 2000s action flick. But therein lies the problem with it. The original fans were not expecting an early 2000s action flick, which then makes Paul's statement about adapting the classics to the big screen slightly more confusing. As much later on, while talking about a later movie in the franchise, at a 2016 Comic-Con he'd say, "This movie is made by people who genuinely adored the video game, and no one would ever dream of adapting War and Peace without reading the book, but somehow, people have the hubris to adapt a video game without having ever played it, or knowing what the fans really like about it." which, let's be honest guys, Paul is the expert and we should all be quiet and listen to him. While I personally give the movie a pass simply because of its awesome theme tune, the reception from fans of the original games and critics were pretty similar in that they were straight up not having a good time. The general public did seem to enjoy it though, and it would go on to create over $100 million at the box office, meaning only one thing: Paul W.S. Anderson was going to make like Elon Musk and abandon his offspring. Plan total global domination. The next movie would be titled Resident Evil Apocalypse, and would aim to answer one simple question: who are the residents, and why are they so evil? This time directed by Alexander Witt in his directorial debut, but still being produced by Paul. If Resident Evil being as action as possible wasn't already evident enough with the first movie, Alexander was going to take it to new heights due to his past experiences of being the second unit director for Speed 2, The Bourne Identity, Triple X, and that movie about some blind guy. Not only have we got a movie brought to us by one of the guys responsible for Willem Dafoe on a boat, but according to producer Jeremy Bolt, we've got a movie that's going into the world of the games very closely. Yeah, sure. Next you'll be telling me the Irish have rights. And speaking of the Irish, since the events of the first movie, Raccoon City has now found itself plagued by pale emaciated creatures looking to feast on human flesh. Umbrella scientists, known for making great decisions such as creating a humanity extinction virus, then proceed to make another great decision such as unleashing it. After opening the doors to the hive, but not even making it 5 feet inside due to forgetting their first aid spray, they realised that they've made a big mistake. A big mistake that can only be solved by one person, and one person alone: a disabled man. Because if Stephen Hawking has taught us anything even slightly important, it's that having the ability to run over the toes of people you dislike automatically makes you incredibly smart. This man's name is Charles Ashford, with Ashford being the last name of one of the Umbrella founders from the games, with its inclusion in this movie only existing for the sole purpose of recreating that Leonardo DiCaprio meme. Unfortunately for Ashford, he has a child who has been picked up by Umbrella so she and her father can escape the city together, when suddenly a child-hating truck appears and crashes right into the side of her in an attempt to cripple her like her dad. Breaking children's bones for fun aside, it then skips ahead 13 hours, and things have gone from bad to still quite bad. We're then introduced to Jill Valentine, a STARS officer from the games, who is tasked with shooting up into the night sky when the stars are shining a little bit too bright. Stars are an important piece of the Resident Evil puzzle due to the fact that they were the ones who attended the mansion in the original game, and are the ones who saw firsthand that Umbrella were lying about creating those anti-rain devices. An important plot point that means absolutely nothing in the movies, considering absolutely none of it happened. The city has fallen into complete chaos, and in comes Jill, wearing her iconic yet slightly impractical outfit from the third game, where her inner cop then proceeds to take over, and she starts indiscriminately firing at unarmed people. An outfit that they actually did attempt to rationalize in the movie, by Mila Jovovich herself suggesting that they set the events of the movie in the middle of an ongoing heatwave, and not actually in the freezing mid-November Toronto, where it was actually being filmed. A higher up at Umbrella, Major Timothy Kane, is the one who remotely woke Alice up at the end of the previous movie, and we see that he's sealed the entirety of Raccoon City shut, with all of its residents inside, due to not wanting to let their smell out. Kane, not only trapping all of its residents inside with the evil, but also trapping all of the Umbrella soldiers inside too, because much like the elderly, soldiers' lives are expendable. 3 of his expendable soldiers that we then see are Nikolai, Yuri, and Carlos, all from the third game, which rather thematically appropriately was called Resident Evil 3. Despite being an Umbrella soldier, Carlos defies his orders and proceeds to jump headfirst out of a helicopter to save a woman, something that Carlos from the games would have also very much done due to him having a certain way with women. But following the way of the simp would be in vain, as the woman who was bitten in the process, despite being saved by a man recklessly firing off his guns directly towards her while falling 50 feet throughout the air, decides to walk off the building so she can respawn at her last save point. We then see Carlos and his team pay homage to the intro cinematic from the third game as they attempt to accurately depict the average weekend in Chicago. But in the chaos, Carlos is bitten by an infected Yuri as he attempts to give his buddy a little cute love bite. Dr. Ashford, like the little baby that he is, refuses to evacuate from the city because his daughter is missing, and honestly, Kane couldn't care less due to his extreme disdain for kids. This causes Ashford to attempt to try and find another way to save her. Due to himself being spinally challenged, he locates his daughter at her school by using a tracker before hacking into the city's CCTV system to look for people to perv on. First, he comes across Alice not long after she had woken up from the events of the previous movie, and she's gearing up at a gun store, where suddenly she falls to the ground as she's clearly infected by something. She's got girl germs. A tried and true method for lazily explaining exposition to viewers that was heavily relied on in the first movie makes its return. A flashback, where she conveniently remembers that she has been injected with something against her will. Something which seems to greatly displease Alice due to her beliefs that vaccines cause autism. Ashford, not liking the look of Alice or something, carries on checking through the cameras, where he then finds Jill, a fellow member of STARS Peyton, who's been bitten, and Terry, a news reporter turned weather girl. The reliance on CCTV to find these characters not only being a narratively lazy point due to this man's inability to stand up and go and find them himself, but also interesting due to the static nature of the camera angles in the original games, something which I'd seen people online often compared to the point of view of security cameras. And there you have it, the deepest piece of analysis in this entire video. Like a non-white person during the Crusades, they then make the rather unfortunate decision to take refuge in a church. A mistake that they're going to regret dearly, as much like the average church, they're about to find themselves vigorously licked. Jill discovers a priest spreading the word of Christ in small little chunks as he feeds victims to his infected sister, before the group then realise that they're trapped inside with a group of lickers. I know that's not a very nice thing to call Christians, but bear with me. Random survivor number 1 is the first to be killed by the lickers, as apparently they can now see. This isn't a theory or a guess, no. They give us an actual point of view shot from this already established blind creature that also has no eyeballs. Being blind is a hoax, open your eyes and stop complaining. They then find themselves surrounded by the lickers, who are still made with terrible CGI, as a clear reference to the early game's 1990s FMV cutscenes. Behind the scenes footage shows that they actually used highly detailed versions of these creatures for actors to use as references, and they did intend to go fully practical with them, but after not being able to achieve the look that they were after, they instead decided to just make them look bad. And just like my favourite part from the Resident Evil games, Alice then rides a motorcycle through a stained glass window and proceeds to use her Harley Davidson as a rocket-propelled grenade and blows it up in the face of a licker. Classic Resident Evil. Deciding to desecrate this church some more, she then uses the power of God to kill another one, before using the power of a different god, John Woo, by firing off 2 submachine guns. And therefore, no negative criticism I give towards this movie is valid, because honestly that looks pretty cool. After making like a religious extremist and shooting up that church, while outside the dead suddenly rise from their graves, looking far less fresh than their above ground counterparts. Alice and Jill of course waste no time in spinning around the place and beating up people's deceased grandparents, but what I find interesting about this scene is the obvious contradiction to the movie that came before it. In the first movie, it was explained that the brain remains somewhat active for a short amount of time after death, allowing for the virus to then take over the host and get all weird with them. Whereas in this case, Great Uncle Jerry, who wasn't too fond of minorities, liked to chain smoke cigarettes and eat bacon sandwiches every day, has already been dead for the past 15 years. But by this point, it's become apparently obvious that there isn't going to be too much point in getting worked up between the inconsistencies between previous movies and games. You see, continuity in the Resident Evil movies is like a fascist with critical thinking skills. 2 things that simply can't go together. And speaking of fascists, we then hear Kane activate the Nemesis program. This right here being a direct reference to the game Dead by Daylight that features a character with the same name. We then see Nemesis in all of his glory, in honestly quite a faithful adaptation to the way he looked in the 3rd game, which is positively beautiful. Luckily for the viewers, the filmmakers decided to go full practical with the creature, instead of using the liquor tier CGI from earlier. They opted for putting a really big guy with really big dreams in a really big suit. Nemesis is first fully seen walking towards a building full of STARS members, a group of people who are really into astrology. Nemesis existed in the games for the sole purpose of wiping out any surviving STARS members who knew anything about the mansion and the incident from the original game. But in the movie's version of events, there was no mansion incident, this being a subtle nod to the fact that these movies have absolutely nothing to do with the games. In the end, Nemesis just ends up appearing here because he looks really cool. Honestly, I can respect that. But still wanting to kill all of the STARS members for old time's sake or something, that's exactly what this large terrifying impersonation of Boris Johnson does. He fires a rocket launcher into a building before spraying it with a handheld minigun, wiping out all of the STARS members inside in a matter of seconds. Back with Ashford, he's finally plucked up the courage to talk to a woman and calls Alice on a payphone. He tells her that the city is going to be nuked by Umbrella at sunrise, and if she finds his daughter Angela before then, he can save her from her non-consensual tanning session. session, something that Alice desperately wants to avoid, or else risk looking like someone from the cast of Geordie Shore. So they begin their pursuit to find this small child to sacrifice, but not long after come face to face with Nemesis as he fires on the group, killing Peyton in the process. And by face to face with Nemesis, I mean they're actually really far away from him and could easily run in the opposite direction, until Alice decides to not do that and instead run straight towards him. This is Nemesis's purpose in the movie, to kill Alice. Girls have cooties and must be eradicated. So after immediately running straight towards him and realizing that it was actually a terrible idea and immediately running not towards him, he follows her into a building by creating his own front door with his face before firing his rocket launcher down a garbage disposal chute because recycling is for nerds. With Alice now being chased by a sentient circumcised penis, Jill and Terry pick up a survivor named LJ who was left alive by Nemesis and head to the school to find Angela, where we learn that Ashford has also sent Carlos and Nikolai. Inside the school, clearly not valuing their lives, they proceed to split up, where Terry is then torn to shreds by some of the most horrific things a person could ever imagine. Children. Like a member of parliament at a charity event for poverty-stricken kids, Jill is able to sniff out the small child, but they're then attacked by a group of zombie dogs, where Nikolai selflessly gives his own life in order to save theirs. R.I.P. Ginger Guy. But despite the gingerbread man dying to save Jill and Angela, they're still being pursued by a group of dogs and are chased into the kitchen. Jill, apparently having plenty of experience working at a Chinese takeout, hits one of the dogs over the head with a frying pan and turns the gas on to blow the kitchen up with the help of Alice and a cigarette because smoking kills. After euthanizing the service dogs, Alice and Angela reveal that they're both actually infected because they're both Umbrella experiments. But considering that they're females and therefore technically not human, the virus has not turned them into zombies. Ashford created the T-virus to cure Angela from a hereditary disease because he created her with his crippled sperm. His research ended up working, and Angela was actually able to walk around unaided, unlike her lazy father. But after Umbrella found out about his work, they took his research from him to conduct their own experiments for ethically concerning reasons. But luckily for multi-billion-dollar corporations, ethics are simply optional. Human sacrifices must be made in order to keep stocks high. After curing Carlos with Angela's lunchbox of heroin goodies, Ashford then tells them where they can get a helicopter to escape the city, something which seems to get Alice acting all weird, as she then proceeds to run down the side of a skyscraper before beating up a bunch of Umbrella goons when she really didn't need to be doing all of that. A stunt that they actually pulled off practically by throwing a woman from the top of a building against her will, with Mila Jovovich then running down the side of the last 50 or 60 meters or so, something which was all done in vain, as a magical teleporting cane suddenly appears from behind and captures Angela just as Nemesis rolls up. Shooting the disabled man because he's grossed out by him, Kane then tells Alice that she needs to fight Nemesis one-on-one so he can see who's the best. And despite him being a nimble, speeding, terrifying presence in the game, here he's sluggish and slow with a side of Parkinson's disease. And Alice, now basically a super soldier created by Umbrella, relies on the best weapon in her arsenal: tetanus. She pushes Sam Sulek backwards into a spiked piece of metal, which penetrates its way through his entire body, like that one time my priest took me into the back room at Sunday school. Beating up big muscleheads who inject TRT directly into their nervous system, Alice suddenly remembers that Nemesis is actually Matt, something which causes Nemesis to also remember that he's actually Matt. Wow, these movies really are full of great storytelling. And through the power of friendship, Nemesis is able to override his Umbrella control and accidentally kamikaze himself by blowing up a helicopter. Nemesis has been put to Nemesis sleep, and the group start taking off in the helicopter as a horde of zombies are fast approaching, ironic considering that they shouldn't have the ability to do anything fast. Alice throws Kane from the helicopter, where he attempts to take the quick way out, only to realise that the writers had other plans. After taking off and fleeing the city, the nuclear missile then hits the city, and their helicopter is apparently made by Boeing, as the slight turbulence then sends them plummeting to the ground. After being impaled in the crash, Alice's body is discovered by Jorah Mormont, but there's no sign of any other survivors. Jill, Carlos, LJ, and that little ginger shit managed to escape. Using Terry's video camera that she was able to document the outbreak with, they're able to expose Umbrella to the world, as everyone can see with their own eyes exactly what went on in Raccoon City, which is until Umbrella successfully manages to cover it up and convince the entire world that it was a hoax, with the city exploding from a nuclear meltdown at the power plant because Homer Simpson was on duty. Something which is absolutely going to be relevant in the next movie, considering that there's definitely still going to be a world where people care. So in other words, it was entirely all for nothing. I love it when we get a happy ending. Much like the ending in the previous movie, some time then passes, where we're then taught a little bit about human biology as we see how babies are born. Except this birth doesn't involve some poor nurse receiving a load of human excrement to the face as someone pushes a watermelon out. Alice has been kept alive by Umbrella, as they've confused her for a giant fish. A giant fish, which much like the end of the original movie, they proceed to let free, because once again, Umbrella are f***ing stupid. Not only have they saved her life, but they've enhanced her abilities even more, with the only caveat being that she doesn't remember anything, which is until she suddenly remembers everything and starts beating everyone up, before killing a man through a TV screen by using her womanly powers. Waiting outside of the facility that they somehow knew she was located in, we then see Carlos, Jill and LJ posing as Umbrella agents, who are simply able to walk up to the front door and take her away. After stealing this woman from Umbrella, we then see Dr. Isaacs activate Program Alice, which is a bit of a weird thing to call a TV program. And just like that, the second video game accurate Resident Evil movie then comes to an end. And much like the movies that came before it, it was a box office success. Just don't question why Dr. Isaacs allowed her to leave the facility at the end, when he very much just could have not done that. And despite fans of the games being less than enthralled with Paul W.S. Anderson's interpretations, the rest of the world simply doesn't give a shit, because they like to see hot chicks in miniskirts shooting unarmed civilians. And speaking of hot chicks in miniskirts, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel for a small chance to actually turn into one. Wait, what? Directed by Russell Maliki, but written by Paul W.S. Anderson, Resident Evil Extinction is the third entry in the Call of Evil movie franchise, with the Extinction part of the title referring to the approach they took when following the source material, because at this point, there may as well be no material to source. The Resident Evil movies have all grown up, and they're off to do whatever they want, and there's nothing you can say that will make me stop, Dad. Because in the third movie, the whole world has been entirely turned into Mexico, in that it's all been destroyed. A few months after the events of the previous movie, the T-virus spread throughout the world, rotting everyone's brains that it came into contact with, kind of like a TikTok trend. So that whole thing about exposing Umbrella and then Umbrella unexposing themselves at the end of the previous movie is a completely moot point, because it's kind of hard to expose yourself to someone when there's no one alive left to flash. Much like me, quite honestly, most of the time, the movie begins in an extreme state of confusion and discomfort as some idiot has accidentally put Resident Evil 1 in the DVD player. Alice wakes up naked in the bathroom again, one of her favourite pastimes at this point, as she should really stop mixing her medication with alcohol. Except this time, she isn't jump scared by a poorly written character known as Matt, and finds herself in another version of the laser room, except within the mansion. Once the lasers kick in, Alice avoids being turned into meat cubes by jumping up into an air shaft that's been conveniently left open and just so happens to be big enough for a human to crawl through, because if there's anything we know about air, it's a fat prick who needs a lot of space to move around. She then drops down into what appears to be the Umbrella facility from the end of the original movie, as she somehow found herself in what appears to be a Resident Evil door randomizer challenge. But she's not a top tier speedrunner, as she then triggers a trap and stands there completely frozen, before making like a Victorian era infant and dying. Oh, thank God, the video can end now. I was just starting to think this was going to be a long one. Speaking of long ones, Dr. Isaacs has been perving on Alice this entire time, and then has her taken to the surface of his secret Umbrella lab in the middle of the desert and thrown into a pit full of other Alices. Because what's worse than a woman? More than one of them. Due to the cast and crew having to film this post-apocalyptic movie in the best place that resembles it, Mexico, it means that they've gone from shooting the previous movie in miniskirts and tube tops in the middle of November in the fictional place of Canada, to shooting this one in the blistering Mexican sun, with it being so hot that director Russell Maliki was taken to hospital with dehydration after forgetting about the basic concept of water. Like a deadbeat father being drawn to the pub, Alice, not with her friends from the previous movie, is drawn towards a radio station following a distress signal. Loving to see people in distress, she arrives to find rather anticlimactically that things are just kind of alright. After coming across a woman with a baby, Alice realizes that the lady has been spared a life of parental torment, as the baby is actually fake, like all of the friends in my mind. The radio station isn't full of survivors in need of help, it's full of murderists and rappers. After being grabbed by a group of people with a phobia of toothpaste, Alice kills one of them using the power of her feet. That must be why guys on the internet are so interested in women's feet. They must hold some sort of secret power. This group of rather smelly looking individuals then accomplish what Umbrella has failed to do with within the past 2 movies and easily knock Alice out, instead of just killing her right there and then and costing the movie studio millions of dollars in sequel money. They restrain her and throw her into a pit with zombie dogs, restraints that she immediately gets out of, and a pit that she immediately opens up. Alice then watches as a group of anti-soap protesters are then eaten alive by the dogs, as we see that they've continued the tradition of covering real-life dogs in a bunch of ketchup and letting them loose on people. We're then introduced to a group of survivors, a convoy containing Carlos and LJ, but no Jill, because actress Sienna Gilroy ended up dropping out to work on the highly profitable Aragon movie, and instead of finding a way to explain her absence from the movie, they make like my dad and just forget that she even existed. Something which I guess would be somewhat beneficial to Jill's actress, considering that she was originally set to die in this movie, but instead was just relegated to be completely ignored. But continuing the tradition of inserting characters from the games in nothing but name alone, this is the movie's introduction to Claire Redfield, a playable character from the second game, who is the sister to STARS officer Chris Redfield from the original game, things which are entirely irrelevant in this universe's interpretation of things. But they did keep her as a ginger, so I'm sure the Resi Gooners will be satisfied with that one. We're now 3 movies in, and we're finally introduced to the video game antagonist Albert Wesker, who made his debut in the original game. But trying to tell me that this is Albert Wesker is like forcing me to drink a diabetic's piss and telling me that it's lemonade. It's sweet, but it's not quite it. So this Comic-Con Wesker cosplayer is conducting a meeting via hologram with leaders of the other Umbrella facilities all over the world, and things aren't looking good. Like chlamydia among the lower class, food is low, and infection rates are high. Dr. Isaacs explains that the infected hunger for flesh, but do not require it to survive. They will simply keep on existing, and therefore can't be 28 days later and left to starve to death, so they need to do something about it. And something about it Dr. Isaacs has been doing, but he has made it infinitely harder, no thanks to himself, as he's been cloning Alice and using her blood as a way to domesticate and control the infected. The only problem being is that the cloned blood isn't quite as potent as the original thing, so he's been struggling to finish it. If only someone didn't just freely let her leave the facility in the previous movie. That would have just been silly. While out and about, Alice comes across a guy hanging about before finding his diary. Wanting to read all of the deepest, darkest secrets of a dead man, she takes a look inside and finds out about a place that potentially hasn't been touched by the virus. This strange made-up place called Alaska. Never heard of it. Back with Claire's convoy, they come across a motel where they can check for supplies, where LJ is bitten and infected by one of his biggest weaknesses. A woman with her breasts out. And despite being at the literal ground zero for this infection when it all started, Raccoon City, and spending the last few years fighting against these creatures, knowing perfectly well what's going to happen to him, he proceeds to tell absolutely nobody about it, because screw them. And unfortunately for him, there's none of that antivirus left that was given to Carlos in the previous movie, because that weird little ginger kid who had it has mysteriously vanished. Dr. Isaacs has been keeping himself busy like your average plastic surgeon in Turkey, and has been injecting people with random substances to see what will happen. And after using a serum made from a clone of Alice's blood on a zombie, Isaacs watches as it regains some of its motor skills and is able to pick up a mobile phone and hold it to its ear. But after being put on hold while attempting to order Domino's, he loses his temper and breaks free from his restraints because Daddy needs his stuffed crust. Dr. Isaacs, working for Umbrella and therefore being an evil egomaniac with mummy issues, locks 2 of the researchers inside the room with the creature and watches as it makes like an angry fat kid at McDonald's with its Happy Meal toy and pulls them limb from limb. He hasn't succeeded in domesticating the zombies, but what he's managed to do is create a race of hyper-violent super zombies that he can use to his advantage. Close enough. Paul stated that he was willing to make this change, in part to Resident Evil 4's release a few years ago, and to the introduction of the Las Plagas creatures, with him then deducing that if the game is willing to introduce some changes, then so would he, because God forbid he ever deviated from the source material. Since breaking her way out of the Umbrella facility at the end of the previous movies and abandoning her friends, Alice's powers seem to have mutated. As that night, while sleeping, Alice disrupts the gravity around her, causing all of the nearby rocks and her motorcycle to lift from the ground, before then crashing to the earth as she wakes up, as apparently the T-Virus is able to manipulate gravity now. Ah yes, my favourite change in Resident Evil 4, the telekinesis section. Because this movie takes place in the middle of a barren post-apocalyptic desert, otherwise known as Nevada, the filmmakers would need to think of a new way to introduce dangers to the characters, considering that there wouldn't likely be people around these parts for miles at a time. To achieve this goal, they went with the Alfred Hitchcock approach, not being absolutely horrible to your cast members, but with a group of angry birds who are really upset about their quality of CGI. They choose to take their frustration out on the convoy and begin attacking the vehicles as well as the people in them as revenge for the creation of KFC. People are viciously pecked and angrily squawked at, as these cracked out seagulls can smell fish and chips in the brains of these survivors, and LJ is forced to watch on in horror as his love interest Betty heroically sacrifices herself to save everyone. Is what I would say if Betty heroically sacrificed herself to save everyone. In reality, she could have just closed that door from the other side and have been perfectly fine, but then again, she would have to continue being in this movie. Someone then jumps on the mounted flamethrower, because everyone needs a mounted flamethrower, but after getting knocked off the turret by an angry family share bucket with anger issues, the flames are pointed towards Carlos and a woman that he's shielding. Carlos is just about to become extra crispy Carlos, when suddenly Alice makes an appearance with her cool new magical powers, and stops the fire from burning them alive before sending it up in the air to feed everyone for weeks. With it turning out that the flamethrower they used on set actually being real, as it was something that director Russell Malachi would use when the cast and crew would get out of line. After committing bird genocide, and not the type where you repeatedly swipe left on Tinder, Alice meets a new character named Kmart because 7-Eleven was already taken. She explains to Alice and Claire that the group had found her a few years back, meaning at the very least it's been multiple years since Alice was separated from the group. With her finally going to Carlos to eventually tell him why she left, stating that she knew Umbrella was tracking her, so didn't want to put them in danger by being near them, so now she's putting them in danger by being near them. After breaking into an Umbrella facility and figuring out how they were tracking her, conveniently off-screen, she's managed to stay off their radar until literally right now, as she proceeds to look into the sky while saying that she's been seen. Some may call that shit luck, I call that shit writing. Another freaky little Red Queen child hologram tells Dr. Isaacs that she's detected psionic activity caused by Alice in the desert, and mixed with the satellite snapping a picture of her, he now finally knows where she is, and he can come for that sweet, sweet woman blood. Weirdo. After telling the group about this mythical place only known as Alaska, they decide that's where they're going to go, but they need fuel to get there. And considering that they're in the middle of the Nevada desert, the best place for them to get fuel is in Vegas. Personally, I would have gone to Area 51, but oh well. After making it to Vegas, only to realise that they've accidentally arrived in Dubai, they realise that there's no average Vegas residents patrolling the streets, as all of those ravenous birds who appeared earlier have eaten them all. An awfully convenient plot point to save them from having to use thousands of zombies extras to set the illusion of an infected city. Just use some birds, innit? Since learning about Alice's whereabouts again, Dr. Isaacs has wasted no time in getting ahead of the group and has dropped a large metal container in front of their path as he could finally live out his lifelong dream of watching a live episode of Storage Wars. And just like in Storage Wars, the cargo container opens up to reveal a horde of really angry, ugly people. But instead of some dudes speaking in tongues incredibly fast or something, we've got people firing their guns incredibly fast, as this crate, that's apparently made out of the same material as Mary Poppins' handbag, is somehow sending out a continuous stream of crimson heads. Alice then shows how much of a strong, independent woman she is by removing various pieces of their body parts, where Dr. Isaacs, who was located nearby, is now able to see a live feed through Alice's eyes since reconnecting with her, so disconnects Player 1's controller, forcing her to stand there completely motionless as the chaos erupts around her. Luckily for her, Dr. Isaacs was kind enough to allow her to kill anything posing an imminent threat to her, so she's able to stand still without the fear of being attacked. That is, until she remembers that she has magical powers for some reason, and is able to fry the SpaceX satellite that's controlling her by sending the Muskman terabytes of inflation fetish videos. With Alice now free from that filth in the sky, a bunch of minor characters who I haven't bothered to introduce you to were killed off, like Australian Man after meeting hot local MILFs in your area, and Cowboy on top of the Eiffel Tower. Thinking that now is as good as time as any, LJ finally turns, after I guess just hoping that he wouldn't. He then violently attacks the little blonde girl, but because this Kmart came with its very own security guard, he's restrained under citizen's arrest American style, with a bullet to the head. He ends up biting Carlos in the process, causing him to become infected. Again. Where's that weird little ginger kid when you need her? Isaacs just about manages to get away from Alice in time, but not without receiving a non-consensual hepatitis love bite, as Alice willingly lets him leave in the helicopter to go back to his underground goon cave, because the group could really use that to get to Alaska. After heading back to his underground home, like an average resident of Poland, Dr. Isaac acts like the average resident of Poland and proceeds to inject multiple vials of unknown substances directly into his bloodstream. Because he was bitten by one of his little retarded children created with the supervirus, he himself needs a superdose of the antidote in order to stop himself from turning, is what he theorizes, as he actually has no idea what's going to happen and looks like he's been up huffing aerosols all night. After being confronted by a fellow member of the Umbrella Corporation, who shows his concern by implanting a bullet in his chest, just like Jesus did, Dr. Isaacs rises from the grave as the antivirus has caused him to grow some weird Japanese tentacles that he proceeds to put in people. Alice and the group follow the helicopter back to the secret Umbrella base, only to discover that it's surrounded by homeless people. And with homelessness being nothing more than a slight inconvenience, Carlos decides to sacrifice himself as he's going to die anyway, in order to make sure that the group can get past their smelly encampment. Making like an all too common American tragedy, Carlos proceeds to drive a fuel tanker directly through a large group of zombies, before deliberately blowing himself up to open up the way for the others. Oh yeah, and he kisses Alice right before doing that. You see, incels, it's not that hard to get a girl to like you. All you need to do is blow once through the tiny little fragile fence that I'm honestly surprised didn't immediately fall down after like 5 zombies pressed up against it. Alice heads down into the facility to deal with Dr. Isaacs and his weird looking appendages, while the rest of the group take off in their newly acquired helicopter. After gaining access and seeing the mess Dr. Isaacs has made after throwing a tantrum, the hologram ghost girl then appears to tell Alice that her blood is the key for creating a cure, and this facility has everything she would need to make one. Except any actual scientists, as Dr. Isaacs has impaled his entire team for literally no reason whatsoever. What do you mean, the guy who let this extremely dangerous and also valuable woman simply leave his facility at the end of the previous movie has made a terrible decision? Coming across a clone of herself taking a bath, Alice wonders if it would count as incest if she'd, when suddenly she's attacked by a now heavily mutated Dr. Isaacs, before he scurries away like he's playing a game of kiss chase and he's a little bit embarrassed. In the process, the clone of Alice was knocked out of its water pod and appears to die in her arms after forgetting about the basic concept of breathing. Fighting Isaacs, she then finds herself in the part of the facility that replicates the mansion from the original movie, as Isaacs has mutated into a tyrant from the original game. Alice manages to Fusrodar him through a wall before he proceeds to do it right back to her, and sends her flying into the laser room that was designed to test her clones, where she's then saved by her not-so-dead clone, who activates the lasers, killing Dr. Isaacs in the same way that one was killed in the original movie. And this is where, in an ideal world, the movie would come to an end and the franchise would come to its close with this trilogy, with that apparently being the original intention of Paul, as he said in an interview from the time, that he intends this to be the final Resident Evil movie, with him actually going as far to say that this is a post-apocalyptic world and everybody is dead, which is a rather confusing thing for someone to say, considering that this is a far from ideal world and the movie isn't quite done just yet. Instead, the movie comes to its true ending, with Alice waking up an army of hundreds of clones to probably do weird stuff to each other with, but when they're done with that, they'll be heading off to deal with Umbrella once and for all. But this is the end, guys, I promise. Oh no. My movie accidentally made $150 million. Now some idiot is only halfway done with his stupid little internet video. So much like Alice, after waking all of her friends up from their K-hole, we must persevere and continue fighting onwards by conducting the extremely strenuous task of watching some averagely mid movies. Because clearly I am the one to make smart decisions. What did you think the big stood for in my name? Big fucking idiot? Well, you'd be right. Welcome everyone to Resident Evil Afterlife, a movie that will surely have you pondering the very existence of just that, an afterlife. Paul is once again in the driver's seat, as he's both writing and directing this entry for the first time since the original movie, but unfortunately for us, Paul is a pathological drunk driver, and he's just started telling us how meaningless life is. But it's okay guys, Paul had played Resident Evil 5 since the last movie, and now he's got some new ideas. Although there is significantly less killing of black people in this one. Speaking of racist Japanese game developers, the movie begins in Tokyo, as we see a woman surrounded by a group of people who happen to use umbrellas. This is actually a smart and witty reference to the fact that it is currently raining. Surprise surprise, like most of the women in my life, this woman's infected with some kind of evil virus, causing her to lunge at a man as he walks past her, where she proceeds to take a big bite out of him. And much like my parents with me, everyone around here has had enough of her shit and are leaving. And I'm also adopted apparently. 4 years later, and we see that Japan is showing a shocking visual resemblance to North Korea these days, when suddenly a zombie is shot in the same place the infected woman was located in, because the Japanese are racist against zombies. And women. After taking out that pesky creature known as a female, we hear the shooter say Biohazard terminated, because much like the idea to have Resident Evil originally be called Biohazard in the West, it was terminated due to someone already owning the copyright license, because apparently you're legally allowed to own words now. Umbrella headquarters are located below Tokyo, conveniently out of the rain, so I guess you could say that Umbrella are using the city of Tokyo as their own personal umbrella. Now that's deep. And speaking of deep underground in this facility is Wesker, who apparently fancies himself as a little mole man of sorts. Not only is he struggling with his physical identity, but he appears to have gone through something of a transformation, as he's now being portrayed by an entirely different man. He's gone from an annoying blonde prick to a slightly more annoying blonde prick. The facility then finds itself under attack from a terrifying force known as Angry Women, as Alice sneaks her way in armed with shurikens and samurai swords to really pay respect to all of the Japanese umbrella soldiers that she's about to brutally murder. After doing a cultural appropriation on them with ease, she then proceeds to fart on another group of them. Something which I guess she could have easily have done to the original group if she was really capable of doing that all along, but then how would we go about watching The Matrix that we already have at home? But cosplaying as a judge in Mexico, she's then brutally shot and killed. But it's okay though, because Alice is having a schizophrenic episode and can see multiple versions of herself. Channeling this mentally unwell feeling, Alice, and also Alice, then proceed to skydive down the middle of the facility, right after Wesker forgets about the concept of teams and executes one of his men for being a fan of anime. While they're plummeting to the ground, they're unloading all of their weapons on the unfortunate employees below, as Wesker stands there unfazed, firing his dual-wield Desert Eagles into the air in a truly spectacularly terrible sequence in the best possible way. It's beautiful, like watching childbirth, but the woman has also shit herself in the process, so it smells a bit weird, which is a pretty accurate way to describe these movies really. Sometimes they're just kind of interesting to look at, but also they cause me to sometimes shit myself. After Wesker then deals with the clones, he's then blown up by one of them, except not really, as you can't kill a white boy with swag, followed by him activating the self-destruction countdown, with self-destruction being quite a common theme in the end of the Resident Evil games, because I guess it's a lot easier to blow it all up than to clean it all up. Unfortunately, the explosion takes out a large portion of Tokyo and all of Alice's concubines. So just as quickly as they were introduced at the end of the previous movie, they've been immediately taken away at the beginning of this movie. But the real Alice had managed to make it on board of Wesker's plane helicopter hybrid, and we know this is the real Alice because her hair has been cut short, as people with long hair actually aren't classified as real humans. But because she's suffering from the condition known as just being kind of dumb, she then proceeds to allow herself to be captured by walking up behind him and asking any last words, instead of simply just not doing that. He injects her with some free drugs, just like my counselor did to me that one time before touching me, before telling her that it's going to neutralize the T-virus in her body, thus removing her superhuman abilities. Which we'll find out later, makes absolutely no change to anything whatsoever. Wesker proceeds to talk like a complete idiot in a way that really bothers me for some reason.
Umbrella Corporation is taking back its property.
Before revealing that he too has superhuman abilities, and that he likes to use them to beat up women. But while he's too busy committing a domestic, just like when she didn't instantly kill him when she had the chance, he doesn't learn from her past mistakes, resulting in the plane crashing into the side of a mountain and exploding. An explosion that Alice somehow manages to survive, despite now supposedly being a completely normal human being. A normal human being that should be a ketchup stain on the side of that mountain. Using her womanly abilities to say that she doesn't really feel like dying today, like my wife when she doesn't feel like any of the options I offer her for dinner. 6 months then pass since Wesker polluted the side of that mountain, and Alice is searching for the survivors from the end of the previous movie who have supposedly flown to Arcadia. But considering that flying is actually just a government conspiracy because people don't have wings, she arrives at the mysterious forgotten land, also known as Alaska, to discover that there's nothing here because it's Alaska. And after being alone for 177 days straight, she's then punched in the face and knocked to the ground by the first living person she's come across in almost 200 days, as if she's an English person who happens to support a different football team. After punching the face puncher in the face and knocking her unconscious, she then realizes that it's actually Claire, as I guess she's just got really territorial or something. Must be menstruating. It also might have something to do with that cool new piece of jewelry on her chest, which shares a great resemblance to a device found on Jill's chest in Resident Evil 5, the English Colonize Africa edition. A device that Wesker placed there to make her evil and also blonde, because he has a thing for women that resemble himself. After removing the device, and with Claire still not recognizing her, the pair then proceed to fly over to Los Angeles, with it more or less looking the same as it usually does. And while surveying the city, they see a group of survivors on top of a prison, and decide that the best course of action is to fly directly into them, something which as an American, Alice should find incredibly taboo. Alice and Claire meet their new friends, Luther, Bennett, Kim, Crystal and Wendell, and they're all f***ed. Rather conveniently for Alice, Claire, and also the plot, Arcadia just happens to be a giant ship currently off the coast of Los Angeles, and not a secluded community hidden away in Alaska, making it incredibly convenient that they just so happen to fly here of all places, instead of literally anywhere else in the world. Well, you know what they say about a woman's intuition, right? Run. The only way out of this prison is past hundreds of the living dead outside, or on that plane that can only carry 2 passengers. And considering not everyone is on board with the idea of dangling from the plane by ropes, they're going to need to figure another way out. At the very bottom of the prison is someone being held in a cage. And unfortunately for this group of survivors, it isn't a weird sex thing, as things are slightly more complicated than that. But luckily, this guy's got plenty of experience breaking out of prisons. It turns out that this is Chris Redfield in his first movie appearance. Chris being the brother to Claire, and one of the playable characters from the original Resident Evil game. Alice knows his name is Chris, but doesn't know that he's a Redfield yet, so she's slightly reluctant to let him out when he tells her that he's not a prisoner, and was in fact working for the military when the outbreak started, and was jumped by a group of prisoners and locked in here, meaning that he's been locked in that see-through cage for an awfully long amount of time, with nothing but him and his prison pocket to keep himself company. Amongst all of this, Alice decides that she'd better go take a shower due to smelling a bit ripe, and after finding a perving Wendell getting all inappropriate with the towels in the corner, through a freshly burrowed tunnel emerges a group of zombies, resembling the plague-infected zombies from Resident Evil 5, with big pretty flowers emerging from their faces. Wendell can't resist the temptation of a nice big snog and is pulled into the tunnel while Alice deals with the rest as she realizes that she's got a serious problem. Just like the super zombies from the previous movie, these zombies can sprint, and also dig through concrete with their bare hands. But that's just completely irrelevant, I guess. They decide to let Chris out of his cage, as he tells them that he knows how they're going to get out of here, when suddenly he notices Claire. He might notice her, but she certainly doesn't notice him, thanks to this series' incredible fondness for the amnesiac trope. There's a large armoured truck locked away in a garage that I guess they just didn't decide to check after being here all this time, and an armoury on the lower flooded levels, filled with more guns than illegal images on your local politician's computer. But just as they begin making their way into the garage, suddenly we see a plus-size zombie carrying a giant axe approaching the gate and hitting it. The Executioner, who was also in Resident Evil 5. Except in that game he was in Africa and not in Los Angeles. Close enough. And while their body-positive friend is busy knocking on the front door, Alice, Chris, and Crystal decide to go for a little swim as they make their way down to the lower levels, where Crystal, this well-developed and incredibly likeable character that we're definitely all rooting for, is then suddenly killed and immediately forgotten about. Chris and Alice then find the guns, and Angel gets the garage door open. But the only problem is, after finding the truck, they also find the engine that's supposed to be inside of it, currently not inside of it. This causes Bennett, who doesn't appear to deal with stress in the most helpful of ways, deal with his stress in perhaps the least possible helpful way, as he then proceeds to pull out his gun and kill Angel for literally no reason. His plan is to go back up to the plane and fly it himself, with him killing Angel because I guess he just didn't like him or something. Probably not a terrible idea to be honest, as when he flies away, the Executioner breaks open the gate, and the top of the building is swarmed by the infected, who begin emerging from every possible entrance, like the brainworm that's currently in my skull. Everyone apart from Alice decides to take the conveniently placed zombie escape elevator and plunge down to the flooded levels below, to apparently not be killed by the velocity of their fall hitting the water, because I guess they all just jumped at the last possible second or something. Alice, still on top of the building, surrounded by a bunch of incels really desperate to sniff her hair, swings off the side of it while blowing a group of them up, shooting zombies below with pinpoint accuracy during the middle of a freefall, while apparently she doesn't have powers anymore. Did Alice ever need powers if she was always this good? Instead of using the large armoured truck to escape, they're going to climb inside of someone's fresh hole in an attempt to get to the sewers. But being intimidated by the sight of a large smelly hole, Kim hesitates long enough to be sliced in half by the literal giant, who also just happens to be incredibly light-footed. Like a Roman arriving on British soil, this big fella attempts to brutally kill these 2 poor defenseless women, until they're suddenly not 2 poor defenseless women anymore, as Claire shoots it through the skull with a double-barreled shotgun loaded with Alice's pennies. But unimpressed by the financial state of America, the Executioner proceeds to get back up and throw his axe at the pair, before Alice decides to use the shotgun to take its head completely off, as her character's stats deal more damage. With the unfortunate effects of gigantism leading to this man's death, the group drop down into the tunnels and off into the sewers, apart from Luther, who is grabbed by a zombie and pulled back into the hole. Then, skipping the whole sewer section, a staple of the Resident Evil games, the survivors, all 3 of them, then take a boat to an even bigger boat. boat, and like a Japanese person in 1944, they discover that Bennett had flown directly into the ship. Deep within the bowels of the ship, they then find that it doesn't smell so great, as well as a door with an Umbrella logo on it, because of course Umbrella's got something to do with this. Inside, they find a large room with thousands of pods being held beneath the floor full of people, because Umbrella may be evil corporate villains, but they're incredibly space effective. Umbrella had been calling people to Arcadia, where they'd then snatch them up like weird little Pokemon, but instead of forcing these cute little animals to fight to the death for sport, they would do what they do best. Unimaginable horrors, like thinking that this jewelry goes with these clothes. After letting all of these people out, and finding Kmart quite quickly, considering that she's supposedly mixed in with 2,000 other people, Alice eventually comes face to face with Wesker in his little leather bondage outfit. Since he's become infected, he's been constantly fighting the T-virus to stop it fully taking over his body, and thought that if he had a healthy supply of human flesh to consume, then things would subside. But it turns out that the carnivore diet didn't quite agree with him, as he's been constantly shitting himself. To remedy this problem, he believes that eating Alice's flesh will give him the desired effect, as he's really misunderstood what it means to eat someone out. Bennett appears, holding Alice at gunpoint for Wesker, looking a little worse for wear as he makes one great decision after another, when suddenly Wesker's dogs appear, who, much like the dogs in Resident Evil 5, have their heads split open. Upset due to them no longer using real dogs for special effects, as they weren't allowed to saw through their skulls, Alice makes like the average police officer and brutally kills the family pet. Some freaky shit then starts emerging from Wesker's mouth, as he should really see a dentist about that, before Alice repeatedly thrusts a knife into his skull due to being disgusted by his mouth herpes. She then fires her shotgun directly through his mouth, and with the forbidden glory hole located in the back of his skull, Wesker attempts to get back to his feet, and he gets knocked down, then he gets back up again, before Claire and Chris make like a backed up dude at the gay bukkake and completely unload on him. But because it's Wesker, it turns out that Wesker survived his shower and has managed to once again fly away in his little planecopter thing before activating the self-destruct sequence, just as he did in Tokyo back at the beginning of the movie. Something that Alice had already preempted due to being at Tokyo in the beginning of the movie, leading her to put the bomb inside of his own plane. The movie then comes to an end with us seeing that Luther survived the poop tunnels, and that all of the ship's survivors don't have shadows for some reason. Disgusted by the fact that the survivors have disregarded basic physics, the ship is then suddenly descended on by an entire fleet of Umbrella soldiers, who we see is being commanded by Jill while she has her boobs out, because they command more respect. She too also has a mind control device attached to her boob brain, and is also an evil blonde, much like her character from the completely unrelated video game known as Resident Evil 5. I guess that's just one big coincidence. And speaking of coincidences, I too have something strange and red emerging from my boobs that hurts to the touch, and I'm getting weaker by the day. But there's no time to dwell on minor inconveniences such as tumorous chest growths, when there's even more of these movies to take a look at that I'm completely committed to finishing, because my autism won't let me stop. I'm hyperfixated on these movies, like a Minecraft YouTuber is hyperfixated on children. Resident Evil Retribution is the fifth movie in the franchise, once again written and directed by Paul, with Retribution being a perfect way to describe this movie, as its existence is retribution against all of the people who didn't like how he treated the source material. Beginning with my favourite mechanic from the game, being able to reverse time, we see Alice defying gravity as she emerges from the water, as it's immediately beginning where the previous movie ended, except backwards. Alice is sent flying off the ship after almost turning herself into an Alice sandwich, before she suddenly wakes up in a bed after apparently applying copious amounts of minoxidil the night before, as we then see that the entire Resident Evil movie franchise has been nothing more than a severe schizophrenic hallucination, as she's actually a housewife married to Carlos with a deaf daughter named Becky. Upset that she was given a defective daughter, she then wills the zombie apocalypse into reality, as we then see Carlos be attacked and bitten by a zombie because he's such a tasty snack. Alice and Becky then make a run for it, only to discover that they're surrounded by absolute chaos. In other words, they're in American suburbia. While fleeing the terror that is middle-class white people, Alice and Becky are almost run over by Rain, who was killed in the original movie, as she has an average woman driver moment. Anyway, she immediately crashes the car and is abandoned by Alice and Becky, who honestly couldn't care less about this lady, before Alice is then killed by an infected Carlos after retreating into a house. It's about this time that Paul realised that he hasn't shown his naked wife to the entire world for a while, so Alice then wakes up in an Umbrella facility with nothing but a Tesco receipt covering her. She was actually captured back at Arcadia, and all of those events that just happened didn't happen. It turns out, just like that time where I got married, had kids and felt genuine happiness for the first time in my life, it was all just a dream. Rather unfortunately for Alice, she's then woken up by a woman who promises her that she's not upset, before repeatedly torturing her with an ear-piercing sound with the intention of getting information out of her. Somewhat rather counterintuitive, considering afterwards that she's going to have somewhat of a difficult time listening to her questions. The state-of-the-art Umbrella security system that's keeping this extremely dangerous prisoner locked up suddenly turns off as the computer controlling it has begun a forced Windows update. And much like the monotony of once again experiencing a forced software update, we're then delivered a forced reference to a slightly more interesting Resident Evil movie as Alice starts running down a corridor while being pursued by a grid of lasers that she's simply able to outrun. She manages to get away by rather smartly using the front door, as it appears that the geniuses at Umbrella HQ decided to put the prisoner cells directly next to the exit of the building. She then finds herself in the streets of Tokyo, just like the introduction of the previous movie, and much like a weeaboo in the streets of Tokyo, finds herself incredibly confused at the cultural differences as people begin to consume each other. Running away from all of that, because the Japanese are being kind of freaky again, she then finds herself in another part of the Umbrella facility as she never actually left it, where she then proceeds to beat up multiple people of a different race with a bike lock, as Alice is actually a violent racist who doesn't appreciate the Japanese very much. After completing the Tokyo level, she then finds herself in the control room to discover that all of the operators have been killed already, before immediately being distracted as a cache of weapons proceeds to spawn in front of her, as if this movie was based on a video game or something. After rather conveniently finding all of those guns, she rather inconveniently finds one pointed at her as she meets a character named Ada Wong. Ada, from the games, is a spy who has no true loyalties to anyone except herself, as everyone and everything around her is simply a means to an end to be abused. Kinda like a politician. In this version of things, Ada is working for Wesker, but neither of them are now working for Umbrella. Wesker has decided that it's now time for him to be a good boy, as the human race is now facing extinction, so he needs to work with Alice to ensure that doesn't happen. Something which is done in stark contrast to the Wesker from the video games, who appeared to be quite the believer in every German's favourite pastime, eugenics. You'd think an extermination event would be the ultimate test of that. Alice and Ada are in a testing facility that Umbrella used to sell viral weapons to other countries. They'd show them made-up scenarios of outbreaks, which would ravage fake versions of cities from all over the world. After creating a simulation that they very much controlled and could easily dictate the outcome of, they would then sell these viral weapons to enemies of other countries until all of the world's superpowers had them. Which is also completely irrelevant, as it's been stated multiple times throughout multiple of these movies that the infection began in Raccoon City and has already spread out to the rest of the world. The Umbrella facility that they're currently in serves as sort of an umbrella for all of the water that's outside, as they're actually deep underwater somewhere in northern Russia. But everyone's favourite Aryan has a plan. He's created a strike team to come and extract Alice and Ada. A team consisting of Leon Kennedy from the games, Barry Burton from the games, Sergei Vladimir from A Game, Luther from the previous movie, and some guy named Tony. Shoutouts to Tony, my favourite Resident Evil character. But I can't give a shout out to this Leon, at least this movie's interpretation of him. He has absolutely none of the charisma and none of the charm from everyone's favourite 2005 hair-having, bingo-loving stud. Hashtag not my twink. And that can essentially be translated to the rest of the characters too. Barry was a member of STARS in the original games. Remember those guys? They love themselves some astrology. So if Barry is in STARS, then surely he'd have some sort of reaction to seeing Jill Valentine, who was also in STARS, now being blonde with her boobies out, while simultaneously trying to kill him. But mope. The f*** is a mope? Then there's Sergei Vladimir, who was an Umbrella executive, who was killed by Wesker in the game Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles, that game that was made for the Mario Kart machine. I'm not really sure who Tony is, but with some rigorous and extensive research that involves typing into Google Resident Evil Tony, we can see that Tony Redgrave was originally planned to be the main character in Resident Evil 4, before that character would be turned into Dante in Devil May Cry. Or, you know, he really just could be some dude named Tony. But nonetheless, if you're a fan enough of these games to recognize who these characters are supposed to be, especially Vladimir, considering that he was introduced in a game created for the machine that you had to turn on first to play Wii Sports, you're likely going to care how these characters are treated. It's an incredibly odd choice for a team, and seems to exist purely to have some more names from the games. And with the exception of Luther, there is absolutely no introduction to any of these characters, with there being zero established reasons to why any of them would be working together all of a sudden. It's not like you can really rely on your game knowledge to fill in the gaps either, because this movie is suffering from late-stage dementia and doesn't retain any more knowledge. But hey, stranger things have happened, like you watching this far into this video. Anyway, the team is tasked with infiltrating the facility, saving Alice and Ada, before blowing the place up in classic Resident Evil fashion, with the only caveat being that they've opted for the Al-Qaeda approach of arming the explosives before entering, instead of just simply not doing that. With the strike team hoping to get blown up to be granted 1,000 virgins each, we see that Jill is a bit busy being evil for the sake of being evil. The mind control device attached to her chest is being controlled by the Red Queen, who now apparently runs Umbrella. Yes, the Red Queen from the original movie, because all children are evil and must be eradicated. Children who purely exist for a callback to the original movie, because a franchise already as well established as Resident Evil definitely doesn't have a plethora of far more interesting bad guys to choose from that could definitely serve as something more refreshing. Unlike the gradual switch from action and substance to a movie that exists purely for the action with zero of the substance. Which is saying an awful lot when you take into consideration that I'm comparing it against the original movie, which was about as deeply written as the dialogue from the first game.
What a mansion!
But starting in the previous movie, the tonal shift towards bigger and more, quote, impressive action has really taken center stage at the expense of the actual storytelling aspect of the storytelling medium. The Red Queen was hardly a well-written and deeply engaging character in the original movie. She was just trying to kill everybody to save humanity from an outbreak. But in this entry, she's just evil for the sake of being evil, with this literal AI computer program having a huge scowl across her face every time she's on screen. So not only did Umbrella code this program to have the ability to overthrow them, but they also decided to give her the choice of having a perpetual stank face. Watching these movies is like watching a mentally challenged person resist arrest. I really should look away, but why am I enjoying this so much? God, don't tell my mother I said that. Just to really make sure that you know you're watching a movie based on a video game, the rest of it then takes place in multiple recreations of fictional places, like New York City and Moscow. Those must be some fancy made-up Resident Evil cities. Passing through a New York environment used to test bioweapons, the Red Queen presses the on button as Alice and Ada are confronted by the same type of enemy that appeared in the previous movie, the Executioner. But here's the kicker. There's two of them now. With my mind completely blown by that innovation in storytelling, Alice and Ada proceed to blow their minds by quite literally blowing them up, as I guess these guys had significantly less HP than that one dude in the previous movie. The strike team then make it to the Moscow test zone, where they're then confronted by a group of Soviet-era army zombies, who proceed to make like the Russian military and begin indiscriminately blowing up a civilian area. Zombies that once again are very much like the Los Plagas infected from Resident Evil 4 and 5, due to their ability to use guns with about as much accuracy as a South Sudan child soldier. Leon then comes face to face with an infinitely less cool version of the chainsaw enemy from Resi 4 and proceeds to watch it as it kills everyone's favourite character Tony, as Tony didn't possess the ability to simply take a step backwards. Alice and Ada enter the simulation area from the beginning of the movie as we learn that it wasn't actually a dream, as she comes across the dead clone of herself. Just like all of the people you see in the real world, everyone in these simulations are fake. They're all clones. But despite that, Alice then discovers the deaf child Becky, who thinks that Alice is her mother, as apparently as well as being deaf, she's also blind, as this woman has completely different hair and a different outfit. Despite being confused as to how a person could possibly switch up their style in a time of crisis, Becky leaves the house with both of her new mums, for them to then be confronted by Jill and a group of Umbrella soldiers, consisting of clones of Rain, Juan and Carlos. Perhaps insinuating to the fact that all three of them were actually clones all along, as they did all work for Umbrella at one point or another, or just being an insinuation for bringing people back for the sake of bringing people back. Ada has her trusty grapple hook from Resident Evil 4 that she proceeds to violently grapple people with, before giving it to Alice as things start to get quite hairy around here and no one's brought the hair removal cream. After giving Alice her hook shot, as well as some cool glasses, because you can never have enough cool glasses, Ada stays behind while Alice and her fake child escapes, and she manages to survive the onslaught by repeatedly firing her guns into the floor in a circular swaying motion, all within the time that it takes for her to see someone firing a rocket and it impacting the building. Hell yeah, girl power. After coming across the friendly version of Rain from the intro, Alice proceeds to give this child to a complete stranger so she can go off and help the strike team that's currently supposed to be helping her. They're not exactly doing great, and it's not only because they're currently in Russia. Sergei is grabbed and killed by a giant licker that unfortunately is still created out of CGI, as unfortunately the budget for the movie wouldn't allow them to create man-made horrors beyond our wildest imaginations. In what could be a homage or rehashing of old ideas, honestly it's hard to tell between the two sometimes, Alice then makes a dramatic appearance to save the group from the licker while using a vehicle, just like she did way back in the second movie. Being pursued by a group of zombies driving cars, motorcycles, and firing mounted machine guns, it would appear that they're all actually perfectly safe, as despite being directly in the line of fire from multiple giant guns capable of ripping through the vehicle, everybody is miraculously unharmed. And with those pesky Russians out of the way, Alice then proceeds to play Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, except with a car, and uses it to grind down the stairs of a subway tunnel while being pursued by a giant fleshy abomination. But with her quick thinking, she's able to dispatch of Nikocado before the Ozempic allegations by bringing down a part of the subway on it. After using the Apple Vision Pro glasses provided by Ada, Alice is able to find a way out of the facility. But in the process, friendly Rain is killed by the Big Licker before it engages in its favourite pastime of stealing young children. Barry is then killed by Jill's umbrella soldiers, RIP that guy, I loved you in Lost, and Alice kills the Licker with the power of a cool front flip before performing an impromptu C-section to save Becky from her nice little cozy flesh cocoon. After making it to the clone factory, aka what they turn Planned Parenthood remains into, they discover that they're all actually created with the Polar Express tier CGI, so decides to put them all out of their misery as the Licker is back to lick a small child. After making like a drone strike operator when seeing an innocent civilian, the place then begins to explode as the planned explosives placed by the strike team begin to detonate as Leon, Luther, Alice and Becky manage to escape. But while driving away on the surface, the ice begins to break beneath them as an umbrella submarine emerges. It's Jill showing off her new pet, an Asian. Disgusted by her racially insensitive remarks, Alice begins fighting Jill and manages to dodge her bullets through the power of dance. Meanwhile, the clone of Rain has decided that it's a perfectly acceptable time to start injecting herself with nefarious substances, causing her to freak out in a roid rage as her testicles drastically shrink, where she proceeds to shrug off a bunch of gunfire. Paul, then using his expert knowledge of creating video game movies, then references his work from the absolute classic that is 1995's Mortal Kombat movie by entirely forgetting what video game movie he's currently making, as Rain breaks Leon's arm and stops Luther's heart in the style of a Mortal Kombat fatality. After hitting each other with sticks, like overstimulated Vietnamese children having fun, Alice gets well and truly beaten up by Jill before managing to remove her mind control device that's just casually sitting out there in the open, ready for anyone to take. Rain then decides that it's time to punch Alice in the chest to damage her heart, before being saved by Jill, now with the device removed, throws Alice a gun to defend herself with, despite Claire having severe amnesia for days after losing her mind control device, and not even recognizing her own brother. These movies have got their wires so crossed, it's given me a testicular torsion. So after breaking Alice's heart, Alice responds by firing the gun at Rain's feet, causing her to fall through the ice and to be pulled to the bottom of the ocean by a group of zombies, as apparently the infected now attack the infected. But just like Paul did when creating this movie, let's not try to think about it too hard. After starting to die from a broken heart, Alice then wakes up while being evacuated with the others. They're taken to Washington DC, where Alice finds Wesker sitting in the Oval Office at the White House. A White House that appears to be full of military and government officials, confirming that the United States military technically does still exist in some sort of capacity, despite the world being ravaged so bad in the third movie that it turned into literal dust. Wesker offers Alice some free drugs by giving them to her without her consent, and explains to her that he's giving her back her powers that she once had with the T-virus. Wesker explains to her that they are the very last of the human race, as the Red Queen is currently attempting to cause humanity to go extinct, before the camera pulls back to reveal thousands upon thousands of infected, with Alice likely thinking, why the hell would you drop me off here? But there's no time to ponder that, because unfortunately for all of us, there's one more movie. A movie full of misery and loss, and not just because it's another Resident Evil movie, but because it is unfortunately another Resident Evil movie, and someone was killed while making it, and another person lost their arm. And what's most insulting about all of it is that they didn't even get killed making a good movie. A movie that, according to director Paul W.S. Anderson, is actually a return to Resident Evil's survival horror roots, and definitely not just a completely insane thing that he said one time. Resident Evil: The Final Chapter begins with Alice talking about Umbrella's origins. Someone named Professor Marcus created the T-virus due to wanting to create a cure for his daughter Alyssa, who was suffering from the progeria virus, a disease that causes her cells to rapidly age, meaning that rather fortunately for her, she gets to die before watching another one of Paul's Resident Evil movies, with James Marcus being a character from the world of the games, where he was one of the co-founders of Umbrella, who liked to spend his spare time doing illegal experiments on little children because he thought it was fun. funny. And speaking of funny, isn't it kind of funny that a different character, Dr. Ashford, was already established as the creator of the T-virus way back in the second movie, but nobody really noticed or cared, because that would have meant they actually had to pay attention to the plot. Well, in this movie's interpretation of the T-virus creation, things went well at first until they didn't, causing James Marcus to want to close down the program, resulting in Dr. Isaacs and Wesker killing him so they can continue the research for themselves. In the aftermath of James's death, Dr. Isaacs would then become the legal guardian of Alicia, who just so happens to own 50% of the Umbrella Corporation, while he owned the other half. He would then go on to create the Red Queen in her likeness, and shortly after, the events of the original movie would transpire, followed by millions of Resident Evil game fans being very slightly disappointed by it. We then see the aftermath of the January 6th Capitol attack, as a bunch of right-wingers thought they were harbouring a group of brown people inside. But unfortunately, the people inside happened to be Alice, Jill, Ada, Leon and Becky, with everyone, apart from Alice, completely disappearing from the story, never to be mentioned again, sort of like that crusty old cum sock you've got down the side of your bed. Now go clean that up, you sicko. With all of those people being insta-deleted from the story with no context, Alice seems to be the only person to survive whatever it is that happened here, with whatever it is that happened here being a complete mystery that they just sort of forgot to explain. Alice is then attacked by a rather large and angry gentleman as he jumps out of the water at her after she attempts to drink his dirty swamp ass liquid. She's then chased by a giant flying mutated monster, which appears to be a Capepio from Resident Evil 5. A creature which she manages to stop with ease due to it being completely stupid and choosing not to fly out of the way, despite its whole gimmick being that it can fly. After a brief catch-up with the Red Queen, now played by a different actress, she explains to Alice that there are only 4,470 humans left alive on Earth, but they're all going to be killed in 48 hours, because Umbrella really doesn't like odd numbers. Despite it being made apparent at the end of the last movie that the Red Queen is the one directly responsible for wiping out most of humanity, she tells Alice that she wants her help in saving humanity, but her programming won't allow her to directly harm the Umbrella Corporation, which is somewhat contradictory considering that wiping out all of humanity would directly harm Umbrella, as they're a company that exists solely for profit. According to the Red Queen, Umbrella created an airborne antivirus pathogen capable of entirely destroying the T-virus, which just so happens to be located in the Hive, directly beneath the streets of Raccoon City. That would have been good to know 6 movies ago. The Red Queen then tells Alice that, surprise surprise, Wesker is actually a bad guy again now, and he led Alice back to Washington and pretended to give her powers back for some reason that is simply forgotten about and never elaborated on. That huge setup at the end of the previous movie, with the powers coming back and then the shot of the army of infected, immediately dismissed, like the strange lump on my testicle. I have absolutely no idea why the Red Queen was evil and then became good, and why Wesker was evil, became good, and then went evil again. Yeah, I really don't understand it. And I'm pretty sure Paul doesn't either, and he's just making it up as he goes. But you do have to respect the art of bullshit, to be honest. Alice then crashes her car on the way to Raccoon City, despite being the only other driver on the road, before being jumped by a group of Umbrella soldiers who proceed to beat her up like a piñata. After performing a Bulgarian abortion on her, she then proceeds to kill them all with ease while hanging upside down, after letting them all attack her for a while, because I guess she's just a bit of a masochist. Once those Umbrella operatives have been peacefully detained, she decides to steal their motorbike after trying to turn her car into a convertible. But when she tries to start it up, she's electrocuted to the point of unconsciousness due to not having authorized fingertips. After being subdued and then left in a vulnerable state, she then wakes up handcuffed in the back of some kind of transport vehicle filled with other prisoners, while surrounded by religious symbolism. Dr. Isaacs then appears, now slightly more enthusiastic about God, and much like most religious people, very much believes in the idea of slavery. It turns out that the Dr. Isaacs that Alice killed in the third movie was actually just a clone, and not the original man. Now that's some good storytelling right there. Dr. Isaacs has taken a personality trait of Wesker from the games, as he is now the one who believes in wiping out most of humanity, so that the righteous and pure may inherit the world afterwards, like a slightly more Hitler-esque Noah's Ark. Despite having Alice literally unconscious and unable to defend herself, he proceeds to not just instantly kill her to finally put a stop to this out-of-line woman with her own thoughts and feelings, and instead attaches a rope to her and pushes her out the back of the vehicle to serve as bait while being chased by an army of infected. Something that almost immediately backfires for him, because of course it does. Why would he possibly think anything else? After Alice easily gets herself back on board the prisoner transport vehicle, she brings her fists to a knife fight with Dr. Isaacs. After a light scuffle, she then chops off his wanking hand, and much to his dismay, uses his fingertips to steal one of the motorbikes. A somewhat rather odd choice to leave him alive but handless, considering that she already fought him once way back in the third movie, and knows that he's very much into his Japanese tentacles. With this motorbike scene likely being the scene which caused Mila's stunt double, Olivia Jackson, to end up losing her arm and not being able to find it again. A shot which required Olivia to drive at fast speeds towards a camera that was supposed to move out of the way, which proceeded to not move out of the way. Because of this high-speed collision, her face took the brunt of the impact, causing it to become partially degloved, followed by a myriad of other injuries, including severe brain trauma, a severed neck artery, broken ribs, shattered scapula, broken clavicle, 5 nerves torn from her spine, and an arm injury so severe that she'd later have to have it amputated, as well as a 2-week medically induced coma. The longest and most expensive nap that she'd ever take, due to production not using the correct insurance for when someone's face gets ripped off. With this also being a rather appropriate time to mention that a man named Ricardo Cornelius was crushed to death by a Humvee after it slipped off a rotating platform, due to him probably telling Paul that he didn't like his movies very much. Look, I know we rag on Paul a lot, but people literally died for this movie. Alice then makes it to the remains of Raccoon City after it was destroyed in the second movie, where she's immediately knocked unconscious and captured. Again. This is like the 3rd time she's been captured in the last 10 minutes. Luckily for Alice, it wasn't a group of people collecting women like Pokemon, but a group of survivors occupying the remains of a tower, with one of them happening to be Claire. After telling Claire and to the others about the antivirus, they offer to help her retrieve it, but first they need to deal with Dr. Isaacs and his horde of angry zombie simps that are currently coming their way. To do this, they use peasant uprising military tactics and fling their piss and shit at them. But when that doesn't work, they opt for the slightly Irish approach of launching gasoline bombs at the vehicles and burning everything in sight. Alice then ziplines down the side of the skyscraper because 1, it looks cool, and 2, she's coming for Dr. Isaacs. She pours gasoline into his vehicle before dropping a lit flare into it, causing everyone to cook alive. Except some people are just immune to fire because they're built differently. After dispatching the race of fire people, Alice discovers that Dr. Isaacs somehow managed to escape, conveniently before coming medium rare. But there's no time to sit around and talk about things like the continuity of these movies, because another horde of the infected is coming this way. Alice, Claire, Abigail, Doc, Christian, Razor, and 2 prisoners from the transport vehicle all head towards the Hive to try and find the antivirus. The Hive, which is now partially exposed, due to the military deeming it appropriate to nuclear strike their own city. But on the way, the group are chased and attacked by a group of ravenous zombie dogs, resulting in the death of one of the prisoners and Christian, as much like schoolchildren in the eyes of the American government, they're expendable. Once they make it inside, the Red Queen then reveals to Alice that after the T-Virus was released into the world, a video was uploaded to her database. Luckily, she doesn't have degenerate friends like mine, and it isn't some kind of shock video designed to mentally disturb you for the rest of your life, but something far more tame. An umbrella meeting conducted by Dr. Isaacs 17 months before the outbreak, where he discusses his plans to orchestrate the apocalypse. While in cryosleep, they will cleanse the world's population and emerge with all of the infrastructure still intact, so they would be able to rule the world in their own image. Rule over, like, all 5 of the remaining people. After informing Alice that an umbrella informant is amongst her somewhere, a giant fan is activated and Abigail is given the big suck as she's pulled backwards into a spinning fan blade. After the air conditioning attempts to kill them all, they start crawling their way through the air vents, where expendable prison character number 2 is dropped through a large passageway and into a giant pit, before Alice and Razor are then dropped into a room full of butchered bodies, all hanging from meat hooks. While looking around at all of the deli meats on offer, Razor is then killed by a large creature. After another incredibly deep and well thought out character is killed, the creature then comes after Alice as she wraps a metal chain around it, in a scene that genuinely gave me a headache due to the constant cutting and flashing lights. It's like throwing a flashbang at an epileptic to see what would happen. Another character, Doc, then suddenly spawns in directly behind Alice, as I guess these movies are technically based off video games after all, before they pass through the laser room from the original movie, where they find a conveniently placed bag left by the Umbrella team from the first movie, containing guns and explosives that Alice proceeds to place. The floor beneath them then descends even further underground, as they're surrounded by thousands of Umbrella personnel being kept alive in cryosleep while waiting out the apocalypse. Wesker, also in the facility, then proceeds to wake Dr. Isaacs up from his cryo nap. The real Dr. Isaacs. Oh look, there's that great storytelling again. Alice and Doc make it to him where he reveals the antivirus before Doc points his gun at her. He's the spy. Who would have thought that the guy called Doc, who showed no real interest in doing anything doctor-related, would actually not be who he said he was? Like a bored but incredibly mentally disturbed person, Alice proceeds to look around the room at everything she could use to kill Dr. Isaacs, but it turns out that he's just as mentally disturbed as she is, as he's doing the exact same thing with his magical upgraded ADHD powers to calculate the chances of Alice managing to kill him. Wesker then brings Claire into the room at gunpoint, followed by an old lady in a wheelchair. It's Alicia, James Marcus's child, and the original Alice. Alice has been a clone this entire time. The Red Queen, who was created in Alicia's likeness, is actually played by Mila's and Paul's daughter Eva, explaining why the Red Queen now suddenly resembles Alicia, who now also resembles Alice.
The Trinity of bitches.
Alicia betrayed Umbrella, and she's the one who uploaded the video to the Red Queen, showing that Umbrella wanted to wipe out all of humanity. And only now, 6 movies deep into this, did she decide that she'd better actually do something about it. The Red Queen can't harm any members of Umbrella, unless that is if they're any of the hundreds of employees that were killed by her in the first movie, so knowing that, Alicia, owning 50% of Umbrella, fires Wesker, allowing the Red Queen to drop a door on his leg and chop it off. Yes, drop a door on a man who was capable of dodging bullets, and also the same person who took hundreds of shots directly to the face before proceeding to get up and just walk it off. But you know what they say? Door stuck. Door stuck! Door stuck! Claire quickly dispatches of Doc, and Dr. Isaacs makes a run for it as Alice places a dead man's trigger in Wesker's hand, meaning that when he releases it, the entire facility will explode due to the armed explosives. After catching up with Dr. Isaacs, he then uses his neurodivergence to commit a domestic before kicking Alice into the laser room and activating it. Dr. Isaacs, for some reason, doesn't proceed to use the grid formation of lasers that's almost guaranteed to kill her, resulting in her, unsurprisingly, being able to dodge them all with relative ease, before he decides to walk into the room and fight her himself. He grabs her hand and holds it out so the lasers can take off her fingers, giving Alice the opportunity to put an explosive in his pocket, which causes him to do a little funny dance. After taking the antivirus and making it to the surface, Alice drops it to the ground to release its contents, but it's caught by Dr. Isaacs at the very last second, who doesn't need internal organs anyway. But while outside, the clone of Dr. Isaacs appears and doesn't like what he's seeing due to having severe body dysmorphia. He then stabs the real Dr. Isaacs, which I guess somehow kills him when an explosive directly to the guts couldn't, before he himself is eaten by the horde of zombies. Alice drops the antivirus for real this time, as Wesker then dies, letting go of the trigger, causing the facility to explode, with all of the high-up Umbrella employees in cryosleep being made cryo-dead. The army of the dead falls to the ground around Alice, followed by her collapsing too. But shortly afterwards, she regains consciousness, as the Red Queen tells her that only the T-virus was killed in her body, and all of her healthy cells survived. Which is kind of weird when you think about it, considering that Wesker already removed the T-virus from her body and only pretended to put it back. But hey, just like your drunk uncles saying slightly questionable things at the barbecue, it's best if we just move on from it. Before Alicia died in the explosion, she downloaded all of her memories for Alice to have, so she can be a real girl. And the movie then comes to an end by saying that it could take years for the antivirus to be carried by the wind across the globe, meaning that we're being given a sense of finality to the series by not actually being given a sense of finality to the series. As Alice is still alive and they're still infected out there, meaning that there's absolutely nothing stopping them from retconning their own title, The Final Chapter, just like how they retconned literally everything else. But apparently, despite most of this making absolutely no sense when you stop to think about it, Paul said he's known all of these details since way back when he wrote the original movie.
I was very excited about telling the secrets that I've been holding for 15 years now. You know, the truth about the Alice character, the truth about the Red Queen, the fate of the Alice character, the real agenda of the Umbrella Corporation. You know, these are things that I knew when I wrote the first movie, and I've been keeping the secrets even from Mila. I never told her.
This is because Paul is actually an incredibly smart person. He knew the truth about Umbrella's plans and Alice's actual origins, but just decided to hide it all from his actual wife Mila, due to knowing that you shouldn't tell women anything. After about 15 years of Resident Evil movies, it would be time for it all to come to an end. With Paul creating the very concept of Resident Evil all by himself, it would be time for him to go and spread his wings and create another franchise by himself, Monster Hunter. He's really made a name for himself with creating video game movie adaptations over the years, so much in fact that he's going to be writing and directing an adaptation of yet another zombie video game, The House of the Dead. A little known fact about Paul is that he already created a House of the Dead movie many years ago under his alter ego, Uwe Boll. Now we're done getting our nipples twisted by Paul, it's time to put some Vaseline on those bad boys, because the fun isn't over yet. 3 years after the final chapter would roll its credits, filming would begin for a reboot under the name of Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City, meaning that during the time it would usually take them to create a sequel, they already deemed it necessary to reboot the entire franchise, confirming that despite the previous movie being called The Final Chapter, there was absolutely no intention of stopping the infinite money glitch known as the Resident Evil franchise. Professional horror franchises that probably shouldn't have gone on this long creator James Wan was actually involved with early versions of the script, but would ultimately end up dropping out of the project due to creative differences, as apparently Constantine Films doesn't like making money. Instead, Welcome to Raccoon City would be written and directed by Johannes Roberts, who's had experience working on horror franchises, with him directing The Strangers Prey at Night, a movie about a group of people resorting to violence due to being too socially awkward to talk. Johannes would publicly say that his reboot would be, quote, super scary, giving off the same sort of vibe as a douchebag saying that they're really a nice guy, and that it's going to be far more faithful to the games compared to the previous films, in that I think he's actually going to play them. But hey, let's not get too ahead of ourselves now. Johannes wanted to make an obvious attempt to be more accurate to the first 2 games, and he shows that by immediately not being accurate to the first 2 games. The movie opens up in the Raccoon City orphanage, a sort of spare parts store for Umbrella, and we see that it's the 1980s, and we've got a nice callback to the games, with a reference to the first aid sprays, with references being something that we're going to be seeing an awful lot of in this movie, as references are basically just a substitute for good writing if you think about it. There are plenty of references and certainly a lot of creative liberties taken with the source material, and I'll refrain from flexing my super mega virginity on all of you by mentioning all of them, but I'm also not going to promise that I'll completely forget about them either, because I simply cannot stop myself. Like right now. In the games, the orphanage was run by Umbrella and one of their scientists, Dr. Birkin, due to the common belief that orphans aren't real people. Dr. Birkin would perform experiments on the children that he had access to, and in this movie's universe, among those children are Chris and Claire Redfield. In the games, Claire and Chris did lose their parents due to not remembering where they left them, but it was never actually stated that they were raised in the Raccoon City orphanage. As a child in the orphanage, Claire meets an ugly known as Lisa Trevor, someone who in the games was the daughter of the man who created the Spencer Mansion in the original game, and someone who was also born in the 1950s. So this 30-something 8-year-old girl was kept by Umbrella and experimented on over the decades after her parents were killed by them, because nothing is free in this world. The sooner you learn that, the better, really. It then skips ahead to 1998, as we see Claire hitchhiking with a trucker as he eats a fat, greasy burger, in a subtle reference to the fact that this is taking place in America, and that this movie came out after the RE2 remake. Claire is heading to Raccoon City to find her brother Chris, because oddly her favourite character from the game Resident Evil 2 did the same thing once. With the truck driver too busy attempting to speedrun his arteries blocking, he encounters a minor inconvenience and runs someone over, before his dog gets out of the truck to lick up the blood to hide any evidence. But luckily for the truck driver, women are notoriously stubborn, so she gets up and just walks away. We then get a glimpse of North America's finest law enforcement, as they're all sat in a diner doing absolutely nothing. We've got classic members of STARS, Wesker, Richard and Jill, as they're talking about Jill's new sandwich recipe, as well as rookie cop Leon S. Kennedy, who much like me, has absolutely no idea why he's here. It's interesting seeing Wesker here coming straight off the back of the Paul Anderson movies, because way back in the original Resident Evil game, Wesker was actually captain of the STARS while secretly working for Umbrella, with that seemingly being represented here, despite him no longer looking like a pedophilic Reddit mod. Claire, back in town for a family reunion, heads over to Chris's house, and like the funny, quirky little sister that she is, proceeds to break into the home of a police officer while being watched by a ginger. Claire then proceeds to immediately find Chris in his home of all places, which is somewhat ironic, considering that she spends most of the games looking for him. Claire's been sent an ancient relic known as a videotape by her friend Ben, someone who in the games was an investigative journalist who proceeded to investigate his journalism all over Umbrella. He explains to Claire that the whole of Raccoon City has been slowly poisoned by Umbrella, and that it's soon all going to come to a head. That being exactly right this second right now, as suddenly sirens start ringing out across the city, followed by an Umbrella announcement telling everyone to stay indoors. Chris, not liking to be told what to do, immediately heads outdoors and goes to the police department to be with the rest of the STARS team. While all alone in her brother's house after their quick reunion, Claire is then attacked by the ginger kid's mum due to her jealousy of Claire's long luscious locks. After fighting off the angry chemo patient, Claire steals Chris's motorbike and decides that she better head to the police department too. In this interpretation of the Resident Evil story, Wesker doesn't seem to already be a high-ranking member of Umbrella, but he does seem to be working with someone who's managed to skew his loyalty with the promise of a paycheck, as he seems to have absolutely no idea what's going on with Umbrella after they leave him a PDA with a message saying the city is going to be destroyed at 6 AM. This unknown employer, who I doubt cares much for workers' rights, wants Wesker to break into a secret Umbrella lab to retrieve some of their data, something which is awfully convenient, seeing as the STARS are now tasked with flying out to the Spencer Mansion from the original game to see what happened to Bravo Team. The Spencer Mansion that just so happens to be built on top of a secret Umbrella laboratory used to create umbrellas, but in secret. The truck driver, now infected, after being slightly nibbled on by his dog after he mistook him for a toddler, proceeds to drive directly into the police station before deciding that he's actually not going to do that and flips his truck outside of it instead, committing perhaps the least effective suicide bombing since that guy tried to blow up Trump Tower with a couple of fireworks. Somehow the explosion doesn't seem to wake Leon up as he's sleeping at the desk directly in front of the blazing inferno. But much like Wesker, this very much doesn't seem like Leon Kennedy behavior that fans of the games would expect from this character. Hashtag not my twink. Again, the burning truck driver then walks into the building before being shot by Police Chief Irons because you can't park there, mate, with the gunshot actually being something which seems to wake Leon up, unlike the giant fuel tanker exploding directly in front of him. STARS helicopter pilot Vickers drops the rest of the team off at the wreckage of Bravo Team's car before they make their way to the iconic Spencer Mansion that's only accessible for people named Spencer. After somehow finding a way inside, despite all of them having the wrong names, the first glance at the interior of the Spencer Mansion is an awkward CGI shot, which causes the perspective of everything to seem off. They took a game that's known for its interesting 2D pre-rendered backgrounds and remade it in the Roblox engine. They then decide that despite being in a large, creepy and somewhat stinky house, they better split off into twos to investigate. So off goes Wesker and Jill, followed by Scooby and Shaggy. Back at the police station, zombies have begun flocking to it like those annoying flies in my fruit bowl, with all of the zombies having that fetal alcohol syndrome look about them. Irons would rather not deal with any of that, as the smell of burnt human remains makes him queasy, so he attempts to leave the city, only to find himself blocked in by Umbrella right before they open fire on civilians for the fun of it. So after a nice bit of nighttime driving, he returns back to the police station, where he's attacked by some puppers, before being saved by Claire, as she makes it just in time to commit some animal abuse. While Claire is busy prepping her dinner for later, we see that Chris and Richard make the unfortunate discovery of a person, not just because they suffer from extreme social anxiety, but because he's eating someone's face off. After he's done kissing like the French, the zombie turns around to recreate the iconic moment from the original Resident Evil game, where you first encounter a zombie, and also poo your pants a little bit. Richard, disgusted by the smell you just made, ends up getting backed into a corner and eaten by a group of zombies, which isn't as cool as him being eaten by a giant shark, a giant snake, or a slow agonizing death because you took too long to find him the poison antidote. Wesker has apparently been looking up the solutions to the puzzles online, as after walking into a room, he somehow immediately knows that he needs to play a certain song on the piano to open a secret door, which apparently triggers the kamikaze and Vickers to emerge, as after being attacked and bitten by a zombie, he proceeds to fly the helicopter directly into the mansion due to his extreme hatred for creepy architecture. Wesker gets a little weird around women, so instead of just not, he proceeds to tell Jill that someone is paying him to find Umbrella's secrets, and that he's going to leave them all behind to be killed in the city's destruction, before running away after coming to the realization that he probably shouldn't have just said that. Back at the RPD, and everyone's getting a little bit tired of being here, so decide to make their way over to the Raccoon City orphanage so they can point and laugh at some orphans. But after not being able to find any of the ankle biters, Irons then explains to them that there's a secret tunnel that leads from the orphanage to Umbrella's labs, meaning that they can use that to find the STARS helicopter and escape. a revelation that causes the viewers to realize two things. Chief Irons has been complicit with helping Umbrella farm children, and that he somehow knows how to fly a helicopter. While there, Irons is grabbed by a licker as it aggressively licks his bum, before Claire and Leon are then saved by a now grown-up Lisa, who proceeds to tear the creature's head open with about as much grace as Leon trying to cuddle a puppy. Luckily, Claire remembers seeing an ugly kid once, as they then both recognize each other, before Lisa gives Claire a set of keys to access a secret elevator to the Umbrella lab, with Lisa proceeding to stay behind in hopes of staring at some kids. And with that, we never see nor hear from this character ever again, which upon reflection caused me to realize that if you have no prior experience with the Resident Evil remake, then you simply would have absolutely no idea who this character is and why she suffers from the ugly. I know she was at the orphanage because she would sneak out of Umbrella's labs at night because of the previously stated mega virginity, but the movie doesn't communicate that with you. To a normal, casual viewer who might not have played the remake of the first game, they would have no idea who this strange mutant creature is, otherwise known as a female. Her inclusion makes absolutely zero sense from a narrative perspective, as she's just some weird lady person. After being informed that his city is about to be removed from the face of the planet, Dr. Birkin proceeds to take his wife and child to where the explosion will originate. Not just because he hasn't quite figured out the whole parenting thing yet, but also to retrieve his research. Research that Wesker then walks into the room to retrieve, causing both of the men to shoot each other in a Mexican standoff, except with two white guys. Wesker has body armor to protect himself, but Birkin has plot armor. Birkin injects himself with the virus as Wesker proceeds to shoot his wife. He's about to do the same to the daughter, because you may as well at that point, right? Before being stopped and shot by Jill, who followed him into the labs with Chris. With his last dying breaths, he tells Jill that Umbrella is going to destroy the entire city, but there's a train that she can use to escape, located at the bottom of the facility. Jill, Chris, and Birkin's daughter Sherry then head off to find the train, as we see Birkin begin to mutate, as he makes that face when your hand touches something gross when doing the dishes. Unlike the games, Birkin isn't a huge grotesque monster. He's a normal-sized grotesque monster. He proceeds to beat up Chris and throw him around the room while making fun of him for not having parents, resulting in Claire once again showing up just at the right time and saving Chris by blowing out a chunk of Birkin's skull. The survivors make it to the train and begin to leave just as the city begins to explode, causing the train to derail before making it all of the way out. A highly mutated version of Birkin then rips the train apart, and in typical Resident Evil fashion, he has big obvious weak points in the form of glowing giant eyeballs. But in other typical Resident Evil fashion, the creature is destroyed for good as Leon appears with a rocket launcher and blows it into pieces. Perhaps the only useful thing that Leon does in this entire movie. Then the movie comes to an end, as we're left thinking about how this is marginally better than a Paul Anderson Resident Evil movie, before being rather rudely interrupted by a mid-credits scene showing Wesker waking up in a body bag. He's been saved by his employer, Ada Wong, and Wesker is finally given his Wesker eyes as a slight side effect of whatever she used to bring him back to life. A potentially interesting idea to explore in a sequel that we'll never likely see due to this reboot being rebooted, with 2026 being the potential year for the release of that interpretation. Because much like the zombies in Resident Evil, this franchise simply can't stay dead. As a Resident Evil fan, it's certainly more of an interesting watch than Paul's saga, in part because they made an obvious effort to go all out with the fan service in regards to references and costumes, with the other side of that being the decision to drastically change up the story in some rather questionable ways, no doubt upsetting the very same people who are likely to appreciate those references in the first place. It looks like things were actually on track to turn out quite differently, as late into production of the movie, the budget was cut from 45 million to 25 million because we wouldn't want to waste that much money now. But with there apparently being concept art created of many other creatures from the games, perhaps we could have ended up with a very different movie. A worse one. Just more bloated. And speaking of bloated, while the games may have picked themselves up by their metaphorical bootstraps over the last few years, the movies are yet to do the same. But the thing is with Resident Evil is that it makes a lot of money, and the Japanese might also be a little bit insane. And because of that, there's a plethora of unmentioned animated Resi movies too, with their most defining feature being their inclusion of ballerina gunfighting. And that's all I'm going to say on the matter. Let's not forget about the smash hit Resident Evil Netflix show, creatively named Resident Evil, that featured everyone's favourite scene from the games. That time where that lady did this. Resident Evil right there. Much like the Resident Evil movies, this video has become incredibly bloated, and it's starting to smell funny. A monumental task of watching mediocrity for simply no other reason than I thought it would be a good idea. But while saying that, there's always the potential to have a genuinely good Resident Evil movie that's faithful to the source material. But that's like asking a priest to be faithful to God in the presence of underage boys. Yeah, good luck with that. But like a horrific car crash, I simply can't look away when they create more Resident Evil movies, so I'll very likely be watching anything new that comes out. These movies are like chocolate-covered laxatives, and I'm not sure why I can't stop shitting myself. Overall, I rate these movies 5 Chris's punching a boulder out of 10. So before this video comes to an end, I'd like to just give a big shout out and a massive thank you to all of the YouTube members and patrons, the people who every month continue to go out of their way to help support the channel. If you're interested in becoming a YouTube member or patron yourself, not only are you just generally being a great support, but you also get access to a few little perks, like being able to join the private Discord server, where you can then get links to all uncensored versions of videos. Starting out with this week's new YouTube signups, a massive thank you to Justin Paws, Adolf Rizzler, Mai, Dorok, Jacob Cordova, Ooga Booga, Steph G, Yup It's Vibe, Braille, Crusader, It's Not Nox, Ashley Taylor, Sigma Gang 420, Istian, Derek, Saucy, Giant Mutant Ant, Mr. FBS, Demolok, The Last Final Girl on the Left, Sky Panda, Adrian Almandarez, Pacey02, Dawn Chorus, CeeLo Graham, Blank, Bruce Johnson, I Mean Yuki Was Taken, Haranke, B Moose, Norbert, Danga 1999, Sean Lush, Zaza Lord, R. Chowdhury, Matthew Sabot, Alexander Maria Mola, Kuziak 17, Wodante, and Lauren. Now moving over to this week's new Patreon signups, a massive thank you to Roald, KJ, Angelskier, Walter White, Lisa Jarvis, Faith Smith, I Am Worst Player, Pavel Peshev, Jiden, Aaron Zwires, Pinleach, Thirsty, Jack Jorgenston, insert name here, Diego Ramos, The Dog UC, Jetmax, Evelyn, Maxim Desh, Leon Theed, Mark MGCKS, Eternal, Tito Lounge, Paul Fuisa, German Biscuit, Blaze, Taylor Clancy, Trina Merkel, Resi Sins, Elias Woodland, Rachel Herald, Andrew Robra, Thomas Anthony Fendley, Manhut, M, Gore, BS Said, Ethan Stock, Maximilian, Sondawire Woe, Abdu Khalid, Chloe Pricefield, Sharky Shark, Mr. Beanity, and Lauren Combs. So once again, a big shout out to all of the YouTube members and patrons, and a massive thank you to everyone else for watching.